hypocrisy. The total amount Wynn Resorts had paid in settlements to women who accused Wynn of sexual misconduct was estimated at more than $7 million. The earliest documented case dated back to the 1970s when Wynn still owned the Golden Nugget. The most recent was from 2015, 40 years of allegations.
Hi, Chris. I see you online. Can you hear us from in the room?
I can hear you.
Great, we can hear you too. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
an executive session earlier. So I'll call the meeting the regular open meeting, the board meeting, VOT meeting for March 3rd, 2026. It's 7:12. Macy,
Mayor Billy,
here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sterling,
Here.
Trustee Corvalon,
Can't hear you, Macy. Oh, you're not on yet.
Tanya, can you hear us? I can move on to Trustee Larson,
Here.
Trustee Maris,
Here.
Trustee Miller,
Here.
Trustee Jocelyn,
Here.
Trustee Corvalon, can you hear us online?
Yeah, sorry, I'm here now.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, everyone. I just want to make a quick announcement. Ron Mitchell, you asked that we let folks know you're going to sit up here, right? So you can, just works better for you to hear what we're saying. So Ron just asked that we let folks know that's why he's up here. So come on up. Thanks, Ron. Okay, we have consent agenda first. There's 5 items on consent agenda. Warrants, minutes, first reading of our adoption of the 2025 Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code by reference, the IGA for the Boulder County ballot box from March 16th, I think, to April 9th, and then appointment BOT liaison to the SAB. Any questions or explanations needed, John?
I move to approve the consent
Real,
agenda.
real quick, John, you were going to say something about the first reading?
Yeah, just one note.
Sorry.
At our last meeting, we discussed the wildfire resiliency code, and we've been working through that code right now. This is the first ordinance that you have before you, and that works as a notice to the community to be able to read through what we've been talking about. We've been working very closely with Ned Fire on this, and I think it's possible that there are a few changes that might occur before the second reading. That's okay, and what we would do in that case, if it deviates from what is before you tonight, we'll run you through all that whole change log so you know exactly what you'll be looking at. And at the second reading of this acts as a hearing. So that's when you would be looking at adoption or considering adoption. So I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that that might happen just as we kind of finalize things and make sure that it's fully what works for Ned Fire and for the town.
Great, thanks for letting us know, John. Sorry, Chris.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Macy?
Mayor Pro Tem Sterling,
Yes.
Trustee Larson,
Yes.
Trustee Maris,
Yes.
Mayor Billy,
Yes.
Trustee Jocelyn,
Yes.
Trustee Corvalon,
Yes.
and Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. With that, we'll go into our first discussion item of the evening. I just want, it's the overlay district, the First Street overlay district for downtown. Just a little intro here. Before we begin this discussion item, I'd like to outline how we're going to proceed this evening. This discussion may generate significant interest. It does generate significant interest, and we're going to follow a slightly different format. So first, we're going to hear the staff presentation by Britt and John, and then following the staff's report, I'll invite the fire chief, possibly fire marshal, it's up to them, fire chief for sure, and the planning commission chair to address the board member, and they'll come to the podium to address, but there'll be no time limit. Board members will then have an opportunity to ask questions of staff and the invited speakers. And after that, we will open the floor for public comment. It'll be limited to 3 minutes per speaker and no sharing of minutes. When public comment concludes, I'll ask whether the board has additional questions for staff or the invited speakers regarding any issues raised, and then we'll move to board deliberation and provide direction to staff regarding next steps. So I know this is a heated topic, and definitely can be. So I'm confident we're going to get through this and feel proud of ourselves for how we proceed through it and have a good process. So on that note, Britt and And John?
Well, Mayor and Trustees, at our last meeting, we brought forward to you on discussion consideration of the First Street Overlay District Ordinance 887. And in that conversation, you directed staff to do a little bit more research regarding building height comparisons, operational input from the Nederland Fire Protection District, and especially some information about ISO. And so what we've done today is develop this memo to kind of respond to that direction. Just as a background, Ordinance 887 establishes a downtown overlay district that is applicable to CBD zoned properties within the First Street corridor. This overlay district creates uniform form standards governing height, lot coverage, setbacks, step backs, parking, and pedestrian design. Height is one of the components within this broader framework. We did look at several different Colorado mountain communities to establish different downtown building heights. And what we see in these comparable communities, the ones that we looked at, is we see heights anywhere from 35 to 40 feet. Most communities do have 35 feet with the communities we looked at, but that is not saying that's the only thing that is out there. Fire protection districts that serve these communities, there's agencies that are districts, there's also departments that are run by towns. And there is a huge difference in the structure and funding of those departments, as you might expect. One other note I just wanted to say here as I kind of go through this executive summary is that ISO ratings are really determined through a different multi-factor evaluation and are not just based on any one factor. Ensure outcomes are also project specific and kind of depend on how a building is constructed and the overall construction of the district. I think Chief Schmidtman is here and he can speak to that part more, and so I'll let him do that. But what I wanted to kind of walk you through is the decision tonight. Right now, we are discussing a legislative decision. And I think for what we're looking at is what is the most appropriate maximum building height within this district? And is there any kind of other context that you'd like to be included in an ordinance if it were to be brought before you? In my staff report, I do make a recommendation that a maximum height of 35 feet preserves consistency with existing code and current operational conditions for the fire district. And so I do want to say that up front. In my staff report, there's a couple of things that I just kind of want to point out. It is a little bit long, but the first is the geographic scope of this overlay district. And generally, it is bounded on the north by West 2nd Street, on the east by Snyder Street, on the south by Boulder Creek, and on the west by Jackson Street. This district only applies to properties within these boundaries that are zoned central business district and excludes parcels that are zoned public. In addition, there are a few other parcels that are included that I think you should know specifically. One is tract 848, which is typically known as the Snyder property, and one is lot 1B, which is what we would consider the Ned General property. The other thing to know is that when we are building an overlay district like this, if there's a discrepancy that were to happen between what we create for the district and the zoning map will always control. And we would be building a new zoning map once we do this to kind of indicate this new district if it is created. In terms of what the ordinance itself does, what it would do is look at Article 14, and it basically looks at Article 6. It looks at Chapter 16 and 17 and adds a new article to the code that adds different provisions for this overlay district. And generally, the purpose of this district would be to shape development and redevelopment within the First Street Overlay District area. It would be to implement the downtown sub-area plan, which was approved last year and functions as the plan of development for the Downtown Development Authority. It promotes walkability, it reflects mountain character, it encourages mixed-use compatibility, and provides clear and predictable development standards to folks that are looking to do that within the district. It does provide a generally fairly comprehensive regulatory framework. And like I said, height is one of the elements that is controlled by that framework. In terms of base zoning and kind of existing approvals, what this would do is it creates overlay standards that supplement the underlying zoning that you see in Chapter 16 and some of the rules that are in Chapter 17. If there would be a conflict between them, this new overlay district would control. Like I said, public properties are excluded. And the other thing that it would do is that if there was a PUD that's already in place or like an existing property, they would continue to operate as they do now. But we would be saying that any PUD that is approved after this ordinance, which in the ordinance today is January 1st, 2026, must incorporate and comply with these standards. So you could still do a PUD in this district, but it would need to meet the base standards here that are created. And the reason for this is it creates predictability and eliminates ambiguity regarding the regulatory control that is expected within the district. In terms of core standards of what is happening with this ordinance, there is a maximum lot coverage requirement of 80% for a building. That's the most you could do. For the front setback, it requires a minimum of 10 feet. For the rear setback, it requires a minimum of 15 feet or 5 feet if there is an alley present. The maximum stories allowed is 3, and it requires a third floor step back on First Street. And what that would mean is if you had a third floor, it would have to be 20 feet from the line of the property, the front line. Maximum building height proposed in the ordinance right now, and this is kind of what came out of the sub-area plan and through the public planning process that Planning Commission engaged in, is a 35-foot flat roof or a 45-foot pitched roof. This would kind of be the general lots coverage standards that we would have for the district. For parking, it does not require parking for ground floor commercial uses, but upper floor parking would need to meet our current zoning standards unless there was a resolution of the board. Uses does change slightly. There are certain outdoor commercial activities that would be allowed as use by right that are currently requiring special review. Pedestrian standards, there's a couple of things that were done just to encourage walking down the street and pedestrian activation of the different storefronts along the way. And a lot of this deals with height transitions when you're looking at smaller or historic structures. In the plan itself, it talks about no plinth-like structures, meaning no buildings that kind of are out of line with the general walkability of the street. There are also ground floor elevation limits to 18 inches above the sidewalk unless there's floodplain requirements. On the administration side, basically what would happen is all new construction, exterior alterations, and site improvements would require administrative zoning review prior to a building permit issuance. And you would be the board that could be appealed to. As I noted, it removes automatic PUD triggers that are currently in the CBD that are related to lot consolidation. It also says that any PUD must comply with underlying zoning and design standards. This would reduce reliance for planning on this kind of case negotiation that we have currently for basic downtown form standards, and just says these are the uniform standards that we expect for CBD. I walked through in my staff report a little bit about our current Chapter 16, which is authorized by Chapter 31 of the Colorado Revised Statutes. And when you look at our code in Section 16.2, it talks about why we have a zoning code in Nederland. And it says the provisions of this chapter are the minimum requirements for the protection of public health, safety, comfort, convenience, order, prosperity, and welfare. It also specifically says that zoning is intended to minimize danger and loss from fire, flood, and natural hazards. It also makes another statement that I think is important in this context, that the town takes note of its limited capability to service new growth. In section 16.8, it also says that whenever a provision of this chapter or any provision of any other law, ordinance, resolution, rule, or regulation of any kind contains restrictions covering any of the same subject matter, whichever restrictions are more restrictive or impose higher standards or requirements shall govern. So that's how we know if we create an overlay district, we're generally creating restrictions on that code. So we're really saying these are the standards that you have to meet. When you look at current zoning in our central business district, Section 1631 states that it exists and is established to accommodate a limited range of commercial uses in an intensely developed commercial area. To this end, front and side yard setbacks are not applicable in the CBD district. However, trash and fire access shall be provided in the rear yards. There are some use regulations in the CBD. Uses that are not specifically permitted are prohibited. Mixed use is allowed in the downtown corridor. Commercial uses are generally permitted. Residential uses are limited, and mixed use, there's a footnote that says mixed use is only allowed in the downtown corridor, which includes lots on 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, East Street, Snyder Street. And this is relevant just because of the geography of this new district. Current CBD yard and bulk standards are in Section 1633. In the CBD district, the maximum lot area per dwelling unit is 0. Same for lot width, maximum lot coverage. Minimum setback from a street, minimum front setback is also 0. The minimum side setback is 5 foot for a principal use. It is an NA for ADU or 0 to 10 for an accessory use. On the rear, it's 15 foot for a principal use. It's an NA for ADU and 10 feet for an accessory use. Maximum building height is set to 35 feet for a principal use and 20 feet for an accessory use. And the table specifies that maximum building height for a principal use is 35 feet. So I think it's pretty explicitly stated. Footnote 2 also says that that is measured from the uppermost point of the roof. One thing that happens in planning when you have a grade difference on a street is that it's averaged, and there's a methodology to determine that average of what the highest point is. There is a provision in code in section 1634 about the East First Street retail requirement, and it states that on East First Street between Colorado Highway 119 and Snyder Street, all street level storefronts, including at least 30% of the use abutting the street, shall be used for retail uses only. The last thing I wanted to tell you about in general about Chapter 16 is about this planned unit development. There is a process for PUD as a discretionary zoning mechanism that can be used in the CBD currently. And it states that the purpose of this article is to encourage flexibility in the development of land in order to promote its most appropriate use, to improve the design, character, and quality of new development, to facilitate the adequate and economical provisions of streets and utilities, and to preserve the natural and scenic features of open areas. These planned units, the PUDs typically right now apply to multifamily development exceeding 4 units on parcels of 1 acre or more. It applies to commercial property, industrial property, public and quasi-public development proposals on parcels of 1 acre or more, and then certain residential proposals exceeding certain thresholds. When you have a PUD approval, the yard and bulk requirements in Article 2, which is in Chapter 16, shall not apply to those developments, and they are basically negotiated through a case-by-case basis, and those are based on the criteria in Article 6, the approved PUD, and then kind of board findings about the different things that need to be looked at for a PUD. Specifically, one of those requirements is that the town has the capacity to serve the proposed use with water, sewer, fire, and police protections. It also requires that properties in the CBD that are a PUD must demonstrate general conformance with the intent, uses, and yard and bulk requirements of the CBD or justify deviations as necessary. Just a little bit about PUD approval. It requires planning commission recommendation. It requires a public hearing before the board, a zoning map amendment, a recorded development agreement. It becomes part of the zoning map of the town, and it may only be altered through a formal amendment. If we do adopt a First Street overlay district, there would be a process to use a PUD. However, any application approved on or after January 1st, 2026 would need to incorporate and comply with all of those overlay standards unless it was amended. And again, the reason for this is just it creates a uniformity downtown that is predictable and reliable. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our current regulatory structure and decision pathways. There are currently three general pathways for approval of development within the CBD. The first is what's called a by right development, and these are projects that comply with all the standards that you see in Chapter 16, specifically in Section 33, including the 55 or the 35-foot max building height for principal uses and the different things that you have to do. When you have a by right development, it means that you comply to all the zoning rules the town has created, and so you can proceed with the development of that project. There's another process in 1651, which I discussed, which is a special review use. And basically what code says is though each zone district is primarily intended for a predominant type of use, which is determined through the zoning process. There are a number of different uses which could be appropriate in a particular district, depending upon location, nature of proposed use, character of surrounding development, traffic capabilities, and different kinds of effects like that. These factors could dictate that the circumstances of development are appropriate or not, and they need to be individually reviewed. And so this section provides the process that might happen. I talked a little bit about the uses that you can use for this. They're all in section 1632, except for the fact that you can go through an SRU process for rooftop appurtenances, I would say, that exceed your general height limit. And what that means is if you had an antenna or an air conditioner on a roof, you could, or even a parapet, you could go through a special review use to have that approved. There is a process for a special review approval, and it requires public hearings and findings. And findings are specific criteria that must be met for it to be approved. In general, an SRU can happen if it is eligible for special review. It is generally compatible with adjacent land uses. It meets all the requirements of 1652. It's in compliance with the chapter in general and minimizes potential adverse impact of the special reviews on adjacent properties and traffic flow. It should be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The town should have the capacity to serve the proposed use with water, sewer, fire, and police protection. And the Board of Trustees may always impose conditions on the application to make sure that it complies with those sections or with those criteria. The special review use, if it is approved, would be recorded in a development agreement, and that is a final agreement unless it is amended formally. There is also a possibility, a development path, that there could be a legislative amendment to code. This would need to apply to the district as a whole, and it would need to be adopted by ordinance in the Board of Trustees. That's similar to what we're doing this evening. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our comprehensive plan, which we adopted last year. I think the really critical thing that it says is that future development proposals will be evaluated for consistency with established character areas from the downtown sub-area plan, with a focus on preserving views, limiting building heights to 35 feet, encouraging the adaptive reuse of historic buildings. It affirms that 35-foot height framework for downtown. I think one thing that's important to note is the downtown sub-area plan and the comprehensive plan kind of happened at the same time. And they're really talking about similar things. I think the comprehensive plan is thinking about this capacity to serve buildings. And then the sub-area plan is talking about what we see in the engagement and what might be a character note for downtown. I think Mayor Pro Tem Sterling said it pretty well last year that when you look, or last meeting, when you look at buildings similar to ours, somewhere in the range of 35 to 45 feet is probably most contextually appropriate for our community just based on design standards. The downtown sub-area plan, of course, has a little bit of variance from that. It allows a building height of 35 foot for a principal use, or which would be a flat foot to parapet roof, up to 43 foot for a pitched roof, which is generally for aesthetic purposes. It allows that maximum building height of three stories, and then that third floor setback of 20 feet along the first street frontage. It also documents some preference that came through the community engagement, which I think we noted last time was the most extensive in recent history of the town, for 2- and 3-story buildings, upper floor step backs, and avoidance of really prominent third-story massing without reduction of bulk. And what that means is when you look at a building, how big the actual plane of the building that you can see would look like. The plan does have some diagrams that illustrate building envelopes approaching 43 feet in certain development scenarios that do have pitched roof forms. It's important to note also that this plan is conceptual and does not create any sort of entitlement. I wanted to talk about Planning Commission just a little bit again. Planning Commission did a lot of work on this, and I'm really grateful to that. I think it was essentially a 2-year process for them, and maybe even a little bit longer. In their work, they held 2 work sessions and several public deliberations in their regular meetings on discussion. They also engaged in the planning process, which included several public meetings and a survey. And their work really related to looking at the sub-area plan massing concepts, the pedestrian scale and streetscape character of this district, land use form and redevelopment patterns that we might expect in Nederland, and then this height issue. And I think that they had a very robust conversation about what the height should be. And I think what it really boils down to is like when the reason that you see 43 feet in the plan and then the 45 foot in the recommendation is that as they deliberated, the distinction between 43 and 45 feet was smaller. And so ultimately they recommended that 35 foot for flat roofs and 45 feet for pitched roofs. And this is just a reflection that a modest increase for pitched roof forms is consistent with the sub-area plan's conceptual building envelope while preserving that 35-foot flat roof baseline. And also, like we noted last time, they did not consider service capacity considerations as we were looking at this, purely just the planning considerations. I think it's fair to talk about redevelopment in context of this because this is something that would affect redevelopment. These plans, the comprehensive plan and the downtown subarea plan, did not include any parcel level financial feasibility modeling, evaluating redevelopment viability for different building heights or any different kind of land use requirements downtown. These plans address height primarily in terms of form, character, and pedestrian experience. I think it's important to note that we do know that height can be a cost driver of development, but that's not the only factor. My staff report also does not include any pro forma analysis of what an independent redevelopment project might look like. Determining whether alternative heights or design standards materially affect feasibility would require economic and construction cost analysis, and that's really not within the scope of our adopted plans or this ordinance review. The board may consider whether additional vertical flexibility is necessary to advance long-term redevelopment objectives in this corridor. But again, I think that's a legislative decision that is before you for discussion this evening. In terms of peer community and fire protection context, we did look at several different areas around Colorado that are mountain communities similar to Nederland. And what we see in their downtown districts, and then how, like, some just general kind of stats about their fire districts. In terms of downtown height standards, we looked at Minturn, Georgetown, Silver Plume, Idaho Springs, Salida, Buena Vista, Crested Butte, and Creed. In that grouping, we see heights generally from 28 to 40 feet, with the majority of them at 35 feet. Across these communities, I think we see a relatively narrow range between 35 and 40 feet. However, I think one important note is that several of these communities have historic downtowns, which we do not have a historic downtown. So some of these buildings were built 1860 through 1920, probably for the most part. So there is some differences there about what happened historically. But generally speaking, I think we can say that buildings within a 3-story scale, generally expressed through a 35-foot height limit, is very common downtown standard among comparable communities. And like I discussed, as Mayor Pro Tem Sterling noted, 35 to 45 feet is probably the appropriate range that we're talking about here. For fire protection governance and capacity context, what I did is the Department of Local Affairs, which is commonly known as DOLA, has what's called a local government portal. And on that portal, you can look at different special districts and governments' budgets. And so what I did is look a little bit at governance model, staffing structure, apparatus, inventory, aerial ladder capability, station proximity, water system capacity, mutual aid agreements. I found that we don't get all that information about all these districts, and that's fine, because I think ultimately what really matters is what is their budget, how many people are they served by, and what is any kind of contextual information we have. I'm not going to walk you through all of the district information, but I think what we see is that there is a wide range of how fire is set up in Colorado. You know, in Clear Creek County, there's a Clear Creek Fire Authority. They have a general fund appropriation of about $3.1 million. They have a large staff that includes professional firefighters, meaning paid firefighters and volunteers. Salida Fire Department is similar. They are funded through the city, and they have another large budget, and they have several firefighters. Buena Vista is the same. They're in the Chaffee County Fire Protection District, which serves a much larger area. And they have, a similar range of expenditures in that $3 million range, although they do have a huge capital project fund. Minturn is in the Eagle River Fire Protection District, which includes sub-districts, which is kind of interesting. And they all have different kinds of mill levies and debt service, but their general fund revenues are budgeted at $23 million, which is fairly significant. Crested Butte is, again, through the Crested Butte Fire Protection District. It's 220 square mile district. They have a little bit more than a $5 million budget. And again, professional and volunteer firefighters. And then Creed, I think, was really the outstanding one for me. They are a smaller town, which is kind of comparable to us. They have a very small budget of $483,000. Huge, well, relatively big assessed valuation for what they have, and a very small volunteer fire force, but they also had the highest building height in their downtown. So I think overall, this kind of peer review that we did doesn't really establish an operational threshold or technical limit regarding downtown development standards, but it does kind of show us that these height standards do cluster within a band, and that really fire protection is contextual to the community. And I think it's really appropriate for a conversation like this to happen in a legislative context, to think about all those different contextual things that do affect our capacity and how that should implicate policy. I think Chief is going to talk about kind of fire protection district capacity a little bit. So I'll just finalize here saying that in terms of how a legislative action happens under the Colorado Revised Statutes, which we fall under as a statutory municipality, the general thing that happens is the board establishes zoning through legislative action. The Planning Commission is advisory in that role. They weigh in on this policy as we create it. And then in certain cases, as we go through a building process, an SRU or something like that may be coming before them. The fire district provides operational expertise, as you see in those Chapter 16 notes, that we do need to take into account our capacity to serve a new development. And then the zoning entitlement authority rests with you, the Board of Trustees. Tonight, the policy decision before you is, what is the maximum building height for the First Street Overlay District if we consider it? And I think that there's a lot of things that is contextual to this conversation. One is what we see in our adopted plans of the sub-area plan and the comp plan, what we see in the existing CBD baseline zoning, which is that 35-foot, and those other standards that we talked about earlier. Redevelopment flexibility for what we want to see happen in the future downtown. Operational conditions there, which should include fire, police, water, wastewater, and different, all the different things that we would need to serve that development with. I think predictability is an important factor in redevelopment and making sure that we have predictable, clean standards and easy processes for people to navigate. And then just the long-term corridor planning. What is this overlay district intended to be as we move forward? I tried to give you several alternatives in your staff report. The first one is you don't have to take action. If you choose to take no action, the CBD standards remain in effect, and we would not be establishing a First Street Overlay District at this time. This would just maintain the existing regulatory condition that we see on the street. Option 2 is you could direct staff to present an ordinance establishing the First Street Overlay District. If you do determine that this is an appropriate step to take, you would still be considering that ordinance. It wouldn't be passed tonight, but staff would return with the ordinance to establish the district with any conditions you would like us to consider. We are specifically asking you about height, but you may also present us with other direction or modifications to the code or to the zoning that you would like to see. We are specifically asking for direction about establishing a minimum or a maximum building height. I think I gave you a couple of considerations in my staff report. If you do establish a maximum building height of 35 foot, it would be consistent with the existing CBD baseline. It would align with what we see as the most common height standard among the peer communities that we did research. It would establish a clear and uniform regulatory framework. It would provide predictability, and it may constrain vertical flexibility relative to the conceptual design envelope. You could also establish a maximum building height greater than 35 feet. And I think that if you did that, you could do what the Planning Commission recommended. You could also come up with a different height, and you could come up with a tiered or form-based approach tying height to roof types, step backs, or design criteria. I think the considerations for this are that it may promote redevelopment flexibility and economic feasibility, but again, as I said, that's outside the scope of this staff report. It would align with the sub-area plan conceptual envelope. I think there are several considerations for infrastructure and service capacity, including fire, water, wastewater access, and operational considerations. I think community character and downtown scale is a consideration. And ultimately, I think the same things that we see true for the other building height at 35 feet are true as well. It still would establish a clear and uniform regulatory framework. It would provide predictability for property owners and applicants. And I think ultimately that's what we're after at this point with this work that was before us right now. In my staff report, I also noted there are several other things that you could consider as additional standards that could include additional building form and massing controls, step back requirements, design standards, floor area ratio adjustments, public realm or streetscape standards, phased implementation or sunset provisions, infrastructure capacity triggers or performance criteria. And in this alternative, if you do want to add additional things to the ordinance, we would just need policy direction about that. Final option here before you tonight is you could defer action pending additional analysis. This could include anything that you'd like to look at further. It could be additional infrastructure capacity, fiscal impact evaluation, fire protection operational consultation, economic feasibility review, or additional community engagement. And if you did this, we would, you could also provide us with direction for what you would like us to do next. I do want to note here before I let Chief take over, in terms of forward-looking authority, should the geometry of our corridor, infrastructure capacity, or emergency service capabilities change, you retain the authority at all times to amend the overlay district through legislative action. That's always a power that you hold. For my staff recommendation, I've reviewed existing CBD standards. I've looked at adopted plans, overlay district structure, peer community comparisons, and operational input from the Nederland Fire Protection District. And I recommended establishing the district with a maximum building height of 35 feet for all roof types. The reason for this is it aligns with existing code, it aligns with the current operational conditions, it aligns with prevailing peer standards, and it preserves future amendment authority. When I make that recommendation, I think my primary concern is the operational capacity of the district. And I think that that is the contextual piece here. So I think hearing from Chief will be very good for you so you can have that conversation and you can set the district height if you're ready to do that at what is most appropriate. So as my formal request for direction, we're requesting a direction from you tonight regarding the proposed First Street Overlay District. We are specifically requesting an indication of whether or not the board would like to take action and retain existing, whether you would like to take no action to retain existing CBD standards. So you would like to not bring this ordinance forward, whether to direct staff to bring forward consideration of an ordinance for this district. If you would like to establish the district, we are also requesting direction on maximum building height and whether any additional modification to standards, structures, or applicability should be incorporated into the ordinance. With direction on these items, we can return with another ordinance, or if you would like more research or anything like that, we can also do that. For next steps, if you do not take action, CBD standards will remain in effect. If you do direct us to prepare an ordinance, we will start working on that and we will bring it forward at the next meeting after it's created. And then it will go through a first and second reading process. So there'll be a first reading like we did for the WUI tonight, and then it would come forward again and a public hearing would be held in accordance with all the requirements of statutory and municipal code. And then upon adoption, the ordinance would take effect pursuant to our standard provisions of how ordinances take effect, typically 30 days after. If you do request additional analysis, we'll just return with that requested information, revisions, or analysis prior to scheduling ordinance consideration. We did link the sub-area plan in my staff report. I'd like to note that we did discover, Trustee Sterling, or Mayor Pro Tem Sterling and I discovered today, there is a master plan page on the town website, but the way that the index on the search engine works, it doesn't recognize documents that are just saved on the page. So we'll be modifying that so it's up in the body so it is searchable and indexable. But the plans are available on the master plan page of the website, which is where the comp plan and the sub-area plan sit, although I did include them in your packet. So with that, I can take questions from you, or if you'd like to invite Chief Schmidtman up to, and Chair Reese from the Planning Commission to discuss with you, have this conversation, then I think I am done talking.
I guess real quick, any questions, burning questions for John or Brett before we call up Jim and Charlie?
This is Tanya. I'm trying to find the planning commission's recommendations that they had last week's meeting. In the aim today, it was the third floor setback, the maximum continuous building length, certain percentage of green space. Is all that, I can't quite find it. I'm going back and forth from last week's agenda to this one, but my computer won't let it stay open. Is there any way somebody could repeat the recommendations other than the height? I know we've already discussed that. The other recommendations, the design recommendations that they wanted. The specific, like for, from last week's agenda, 2 weeks ago.
Mayor Billy, can I answer that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so in the staff report, it does list the general, it's under the architecture of the ordinance, but also in the packet, you see 4.1 Ordinance 886 to Sub-Area Plan Draft February BOT. This is the ordinance that was created and recommended by the Planning Commission, and it details all of those things, but I can read through it really quick. So the
Yeah, that would be great.
general
Thank you.
piece is the geographic scope of the district is West Second Street, Snyder Street, Boulder Creek, Jackson Street. It excludes public parcels, but it does include tract 848, which is commonly known as the Snyder property, and lot 1B, which we would generally refer to as the Ned General property. The purpose of the ordinance is to shape development and redevelopment, to implement the downtown sub-area plan, to promote walkability, reflect mountain character, encourage mixed-use compatibility, provide clear and predictable development standards. The core development standards, maximum lot coverage in the CBD establishes 80%. Front setback is a minimum 10 foot. Rear setback is a minimum of 15 feet or 5 feet if an alley is present. Maximum stories is 3. It requires a third floor setback along First Street of 20 feet, a maximum building height of 35 foot for a flat roof or 45 foot for a pitched roof. For parking, it does not require parking for ground floor commercial uses, but it does require parking for upper floor uses that meet the underlying zoning code, unless it's modified by a board resolution. It does remove SRU requirement for certain outdoor commercial activities. And it dictates certain height transitions between smaller and historic structures to avoid sidewalks to nowhere and things like that, so that there's just a continuous pedestrian movement. One thing along that same line is ground floor elevations are limited to 18 feet above the sidewalk unless a floodplain requirement dictates otherwise. For administration,
Inches.
Oh, sorry.
Inches.
Yes.
Sorry.
Administration, all new construction, exterior alterations, and on-site improvements that require a building permit require administrative zoning review. Appeals may be taken to the Board of Trustees. And then for planned unit developments, it removes the automatic triggers that are currently in code. It also says that while you can have a PUD, it must comply with the underlying zoning and design standards that are in the ordinance. So meaning that if I have a PUD, I still have to meet the base zoning that I just discussed. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed one. The open space requirement is a minimum of 20%. There must be a minimum of 20% of total lot area in open space that is accessible to the public, which could include a plaza, a courtyard, landscaped areas, or similar outdoor space. And then the other thing to note about the ordinance is it does have some material and roof form requirements. It doesn't allow some fancier forms of roof like a butterfly roof, which is what you might think of as a reversed pitch roof, like a butterfly wing. Mansard style roofs, which you would typically associate with a building in Paris. And it really kind of tries to stay with that pitched roof, parapet style roof that is typical for mountain community architecture in Colorado.
Does that help, Tanya?
Oh, so all of that is in the current draft of this First Street overlay district.
Yes, ma'am. In the ordinance, which is in your packet, outlines the whole, the proposed ordinance by Planning Commission is there. So if you do make an amendment to the height or any other amendments, the ordinance that is in your packet would need to be modified accordingly. But that was the ordinance that was approved by Planning Commission.
Gotcha. And what was the continuous length for a building?
200 feet.
200 feet. Okay. Thank you.
More clarifying questions for John or Brett? I just have one. Can you define specifically like where building heights start, where the measurements start? So like say on First Street on the big block, I think Rhonda said it's like 15 feet or 17 feet or something like that from one corner to the other. So if you got a building on a slope, and the footprints on the slope, let's say, does the building need to step up with the slope, or is there, how is that height specifically?
I don't,
Where's it measured from?
I can't quote the exact quote, but what it does is it takes an average along
I,
the,
I can, John, if you
oh, Britt's
want.
got it.
Oh,
Thanks,
thanks,
Britt.
Brett.
Sorry. So, I don't know what's going on with my camera. So the way it is written in our code and IBC is building heights means, so here's it's in our code, it says building height means the vertical distance measured from the average natural grade within the building footprint to the uppermost point of the roof of the building. Average natural grade is 1/2 the sum of the highest point and the lowest point that is within the building footprint. On IBC, it refers to it as the building height on a slope is measured from the average grade of natural or finished ground adjacent to the building to the highest point of the roof. Hopefully that kind of helps.
Okay, cool. So if it's on a slope, about halfway down the slope, whether it's in the middle of the building or whatever, that's 0 basically. And then you measure up from there. Okay, thank you.
I should have one other small question. In the peer community comparisons, we have a lot of stuff about these other communities. Do you have a brief summary of kind of how Nederland fits into as far as our financials for our fire protection budgets and our tax revenue and all that? Do you have
I
a-
was
just a
kind of
brief-
planning on Chief Schmidtman talking about
Perfect.
his district, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
I do have one more question. The 20-foot setback, and so it looks like it's just along First Street. So the 20-foot setback of the 3rd floor, that does not apply to Second Street or Snyder or Jackson or any of the other street fronts, just First Street? Brett, and actually, Jim, I don't know if you can address it, or Brick, do you know? I mean, it reads First Street. I guess I was of the understanding it was all those streets, but maybe I was wrong.
I was under this understanding it is as well. Just give me a second. I'll keep looking into that.
It is just First Street in the ordinance.
It is just First Street. Jim, was that the thumb up from First Street only? Okay, cool. Thanks. Great. More questions for, sounds like these questions are already starting to peel off to Jim and Charlie. So anything else for John or Britt right now? You can ask later too. All right, with that, who would like to go first? I guess I said. Okay, cool.
All right, so first of all, I'd like to say thanks to the board and Jonathan for all the hard work and research that went into this process and doing your best to keep emergency services and response in mind. I did my best to try to jot down all my ideas as you were going on, John, but you're moving pretty quick. So it's often difficult to look at one problem and not to look at what the next problem is going to be. And that's kind of one of the things that we do in the fire services, try to look at what the next problem is going to be. And so when we look at a building that is getting taller, I'm also going to look at what that building is going to bring. And so the volume and the capacity and the need for emergency response that building may or may not bring. When we're discussing the funding, so a lot of the areas that you were talking about, comparing our district to from others, would say we're at a minimum, those districts were a minimum 2 to 4.5 times what our budget currently is, obviously, except for Creed. And so that's a big deal. And so, when we look at some of the things, we already have a ladder truck. We were fortunate to find this truck at a fraction of what the price would be for a new truck. And so if we were ever in a position where we can either no longer maintain the current truck that we have, or we can't afford a new truck, after 5 buildings that are 35 feet or taller, we would have to have a ladder truck. And that would just be a reason, a need to meet our insurance standards. There would be, so just kind of bouncing around, I apologize for this, but if we had this 3rd floor setback, that would actually add an additional challenge to us to reach that 3rd floor because of that setback with the placement of our ladder truck. And so while our current ladder truck is 55 feet, You also have to kind of think of it like a triangle. And so where we have to set the ladder to reach that that third floor, we kind of have to reach over a wall to reach the windows on that other floor. And so getting an ideal setback and have the reach of that setback for the third floor would be a challenge for us. Let's see. So additions, so responder training due to the difference in response and rescues. While we're already asking a lot of our volunteers, we're now adding a lot more time and effort for our volunteers to give up some of their personal time. With buildings, you know, when you guys discuss about the 200-foot length of these buildings, industry standards also typically mandates you have 2 ladder trucks for means of egress. So if you have people or you know, you either have people who are on or inside the building, or you have responders, they need to have 2 means of egress, and that limits our ability to do that. The other thing that I'm looking at is when we have a building that's 45 foot tall, and especially when we're looking at First Street, when we have collapse zones and the distance and the width of First Street and what that looks like if that building were collapsed and we had either people exiting the building or we had responders on First Street, then they have nowhere to go. Let's see, being in Nederland and not in the metro area, we also need to focus on our mutual aid resources when there is an incident. While we are fortunate to have an excellent mutual aid partners, they too have staffing limitations, as most are either volunteer or their engines are supplemented or offset by volunteers to fully staff that engine. And so, you know, when we kind of look and say, all right, well, we're going to get another ladder truck, the next ladder truck's either going to come from Blackhawk or Boulder. And so that's a pretty long time. All right, I think I rambled. Questions?
Okay, so you brought up a few other things other than the height that are issues. One being the length of a single building. You mentioned, could you just restate that? Being at 200 feet, it would require 2 ladder trucks anyway.
Yeah, so we would, you know, so when you position a ladder truck, normally you're trying to keep it out of what we call the collapse zone.
Sure.
And so normally you will put those ladders on the corners of a building. And so if each wall were to fold out, the truck is kind of in between that. And so you'd have 1 ladder on one end of the building and 1 ladder on the other end of the building. So if you had people that were trapped inside, they can make, you know, and the fire was in the middle, they can get to one side or the other.
And so what is, from a fire perspective, that length of building that is works?
Yeah, so I mean, it's nowhere near 200 feet. So I mean, it would be significantly less.
But you don't have a number?
No, there's no true number. There's no true number. And it also will depend on the layout of the building.
Okay, so there's a couple of other dependencies, layout of the building. Does a certain layout of the building make 200 feet doable?
Not really.
Okay, so.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking like 50 feet, you know, not 200 feet. But there's no true standard for a lot of these things that we're discussing. And these are just all things that we have to consider.
Okay. And then you also brought up that the step back isn't necessarily helpful for you all either.
Definitely not.
Okay. And the reason being, if I were to take what you were saying, is that it just makes it that much harder to get to that 3rd floor up at the top.
Yeah. So if you just picture a wall straight up and then you have your ladder, you know, either the ladder's going to go kind of over the area, this little pocket, or you have to be really far out to reduce the length, reduce the angle of the ladder so you can reach that floor.
So in essence, I mean, is what you're saying is you would prefer a straight up 3-story building
Correct.
versus a step back?
Correct.
I see. Okay. And then one of the things I believe was talked about is like how close you have to be to the building in order to service a certain height.
Correct.
And I think you brought it up in the last meeting, but for everyone's memory jogging, what is that distance?
So typically we want to be this, you know, so ideally we want to be 1.5 times the length or the height of the building away from the building. Well, that's not really attainable. You just kind of have to think of it like, trying to think of a good, you know, like 45-degree angle essentially would be ideal. And so, The ladder typically that we're looking at to service a 45-foot building would be 75-foot or greater.
Because the angle is at 45 degrees.
Yep.
Is what you're saying.
Yep.
And so basically for the height of the building, it needs to be 1.5x
That-
of the height of the building.
That would be ideal.
I see.
We're not going to get there because we will, like I said, we will do our best to put the response ladder truck in that corner. And so hopefully it avoids that collapse zone.
But so hypothetically, just help me with the math here. So if it's a 30-foot building,
45 foot.
you want to be 45 feet away from the building. So being closer isn't actually better.
Correct. And it also makes rescue and going up and down the ladder more difficult. If you have to put somebody in somebody's injured and for whatever reason, the only way to get them out is through a ladder and we have to put them in a basket, you have to slide them down that ladder. And so there's a lot of things that we're considering.
Okay. And so right now, forgive me for not knowing this, but we do not have any ladder trucks at this point?
We do.
We have one.
Yeah. One is
One.
50, it's 55 foot tall.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then other than that, we do not have another ladder
Correct.
truck, which is
Correct.
where you're saying
Correct.
we would require and we would need to have another one of these ladder trucks and preferably not necessarily a 55-footer, a 75-footer.
So safety of our responders and the people that we're rescuing, we would want to have 2 ladder trucks. For our insurance standards, we only need 1.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Okay, so let me,
Unless we have 5 or more buildings that are above 35 feet.
We still only need 1
for insurance.
for insurance reasons, but now responder safety and people that we may or may not be rescuing, we would want to have those two trucks.
Okay,
And then we have no place to put it and, there's kind of a trickle effect with all of that.
okay, and part of, okay, and am I saying it correctly? Like a 75-footer is what we would require?
Yeah.
Okay, and the problem with housing it at the firehouse right now, there's no room, is because we don't have room for an extra truck or because it doesn't fit?
Doesn't fit.
Okay, so.
Or
the
we'd have
length-
to pull a truck. We'd have to get rid of a truck at Station 1.
I see.
Find another.
Okay,
place
so
to put
we'd
it.
have to like swap one for the other, like,
Correct.
sorry, you're not tall enough anymore.
Maybe.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And then the additional challenge with that is going to be our infrastructure. So you have a longer truck, which is a longer ladder, which is a longer truck, then may or may not be able to meet some of the turning radiuses that we have, let's say around the roundabout, making the transition from Bridge Street onto First Street or from First Street onto Snyder. We might not be able to make these turns. And so making sure that we have those turning radius and the infrastructure built in there as well is something to consider.
Has it ever popped up in your conversations where let's just pretend the situation's not happening, where a 75-foot ladder truck would actually help you out in other areas?
Yes.
Please do tell.
I mean, in other areas, the high school, elementary school, some of those places, our district is over 50 square miles. Most of the time, we can't get a ladder truck of that size, let's say, into areas in Big Spring because of the elevation changes, the turning radiuses, the driveways, things like that. So typically our ladder truck, we maintain and primarily set for downtown Ed.
Okay. Okay, but having a larger truck would come in handy.
Yeah, so we've had instances at the high school where we had to rescue somebody off the top and it can reach different parts of the high school.
But not the whole thing.
Correct. Yeah. So
Okay.
things like that, or reach, sometimes you can use a ladder to, we've used the ladder to reach stuck climbers on Castle Rock. We've used the ladder truck to rescue people in Boulder Creek. And so there are additional uses of the ladder truck. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Luke?
Forgive my ignorance, but I don't know how tall the Caribou Village Shopping Center was. But given that we have a very recent memory of a fairly large building, was our current ladder truck sufficient for that?
It was. Yep, we were able to position it on Big Springs. And so that way, that's the shorter side.
What was the height, like from the low?
On that side, I don't think it was more than 25 or 30 feet.
Okay, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason is because it's like a first story off of Big Springs.
Correct.
It's not the same situation as one of our buildings downtown.
But
That's correct.
even from the low side, it was, like you said, it was probably 25 or 30 feet from the low side. Awesome.
Yep.
Tanya?
What was the high side of that building?
I believe the original measurement was 35 feet, somewhere in that area.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I actually have that number. We were trying to figure that out with going over some of the new plans with that shopping center, but I think we determined it was somewhere in the 35-foot range.
Do you know how long that building was? Because you said 200 feet's too long, but how long was that?
I don't know.
Do you know how long the B&F is?
I don't know. Maybe our fire marshal knows. If you can pipe in, but
Just to give it a perspective, 'cause I'm trying to feel like the perspective if 200 feet's
Yeah,
too long, just visually for a building.
I just don't remember. I'm sorry.
Good question, though. Thank you. It was a little under 300 feet. Did you hear that, Tanya?
For the B&F or
was
the
it-
shopping mall?
The Caribou Village.
Okay.
And then,
Just based on a quick calculation off of satellite image on Google Maps, so don't quote me on that.
Okay.
number.
likely
Rough-
over 200 feet.
Plus or minus 10%.
Okay. So B&F is obviously a lot less.
Yeah.
But that would seem long on First Street.
No, she said, but the B&F is less, she said. Yeah.
That's about 200.
Oh, really? Okay.
The B&F is.
So the B&F itself is around 200.
Okay.
But these are
So-
also ground, some of these are ground level.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just thinking visually how that would look, one big B&F sized building on First Street.
Yeah.
No, maybe that number needs to go down to 100 feet,
That's a good question for sure. Any more questions for Chief? I think we can ask him later too. If not, we'll.
Well, yeah, I had one about
for it.
he needs 45 feet to put the ladder, but how wide is First Street?
Depends on where.
A sec.
Well, okay, in average, I
John's,
guess.
John's looking right now.
I mean, I don't think you could,
Setback, is that right, John?
and then I guess in an
Because of the
an
parking,
ideal
it's a
world, we'll
little-
have cars parked.
Can you turn Tanya up a bit? We can't hear her very well.
I looked at First Street, Second Street, and Snyder. Second Street generally is 25 feet wide. On First Street, there's a lot of variation. There's parts near Busey's where the parking is kind of between them and where the alpaca store is, that when you consider the parking is only 16 feet.
That 16 feet, including the parking, or 16 feet?
Without the parking,
the
because you have to assume that parking is taken.
Yeah.
19 feet on Snyder. Typically, I think that's kind of a typical cross section there. And then on First Street, it just varies. As you think about walking down the street, like when you look at right next to the Rustic Moose, there's a little section of old sidewalk or something there. That right there between the parking and that side is 24 feet. So when you consider the parking, that's another, depending on how people park, to 13
Right.
to 15 feet.
So there's no way you'll get that ideal, I mean, even with nobody in there. Radius.
But
that
that's why we
ladder.
also have the setbacks the way that they are, correct?
Correct.
True.
And then the other thing to
true.
remember for the overlay district, the DDA has been working on trying to bring to you a survey to survey First Street, Second Street, and Snyder and look at the right of way there. And there has been some thought, I think, in the overlay district that the street width could be improved a little bit through right of way. And that's why you see the clear distance, that 20 feet open space requirement, and then the 10-foot setback so you can have space for a sidewalk. With cars on First Street, I think you're talking, it's probably not more than 26 feet because it does get wider and skinnier.
Any other questions, Tanya?
No, not at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anything else for Charlie?
Yeah, just a quick question. So I know that there's no set length where it's like, that's good, that's not good. But would you have a recommendation? Like if we are regulating, would you have a recommendation for what you'd be looking for that you think would be feasible and a good idea?
I mean, ideally, I would say under 100 feet,
You would say what?
under 100.
Oh. Thanks. Okay, Charlie?
Just one more clarifying question.
Yeah.
And if you had the 2 ladder trucks, then you would feel more comfortable if it was longer.
Yes.
Like, so if, like in the situation of our new shopping center or something like BNF, it gives you more comfort if you had that additional ladder truck regardless to be able to service some of these other places.
It does. And that, I mean, the other part would be the building use. So if it's an occupied, something that's gonna be occupied at night, so, let's say it's a hotel. So you have a 3rd story that we have to rescue and people are in, versus Caribou Village where everything could either be a ground floor on either side, right? So we could do ground floor rescues on the north side or ground floor rescues on the 2nd floor on the south side. So because the use of the building would be different, my consideration would be a little bit different as well.
So would it be a true statement if I were to say, we have kind of a critical infrastructure gap anyway, with you not having a 2nd ladder truck?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charlie. Jim?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jim Reese, the chairman of the Planning Commission. Thank you for entertaining me. I just wanted to kind of step back and remind you what the purpose of the Planning Commission is. We are your expert, subject matter expert, dive into the details and do the long, deep work that you guys don't have to do because you have things like Eldora and the new shopping center and how the budget goes and all those things to deal with. If you had to do the process that we did for 2 years, that would be all you would be able to focus on. We had 334 separate citizen engagements over 18 months, while the SE group, which we engaged at the cost of over $200,000, our experts came in and did this public engagement. They did open houses. We had 205 people respond to surveys. And you look in your packet at your sub area plan there, and it shows exactly what the engagements were, what the public said that they would like to see. And the whole point of the comp plan every 10 years is we're trying to get as much information from those who are involved in our community to say, this is what we'd like to see future growth, especially in this case, in our downtown corridor look like. Okay, so there's never going to be a perfect solution. Okay, we went back and forth and came out with a lot of stuff. The reason, if you look in the sub area plan, we didn't come up with 43. That was what was from the public engagement and what our experts recommended based on all the information that they took from that, looking at other communities, and they put forward this plan. And it was through work sessions and working with the major property owner in the downtown corridor on First Street that we came up with the compromise, which at the time, Cheney Boswick, our SC group, was zoomed in that. The mayor and the mayor pro tem were at that meeting. She agreed, yep, 45 feet would be a good compromise for that, because that's what our building person, our major property owner in the area said, this is what we would need to develop this and make it work. And so we were trying to balance both what our property owner says this is workable for future construction and development in this area versus what the public said. And so that's what that all came out from. If you go back and start relitigating every amount of setback, how much percentage of area of that, how big the fronts are, I'm going to tell you, I don't think this is going to get done. And we spent a lot of money, and there was a lot of public engagement and a lot of staff time, and a lot of volunteer board time to get it to this point. 2 years of effort. We're getting ready to have an election coming up. I'm very worried that if this goes forward for further scrutiny and gets pushed down the road, it won't get passed. That's my opinion. I urge you, even if it's at the 35-foot height, to go with our staff recommendation and pass it with that change if you needed to, because I'd like to see all the other things and all the other hard work and engagement and the process. This is what you have right now, is the legitimacy of the process of all this work and multiple open houses. Tanya was at one of the ones where the SE group presented to about 15 of us right here in this room, and we all listened and gave feedback. So this is it. This is the public engagement process. This is representative government. People said this is what we would find acceptable. So I would just urge you, so much stuff. A couple of hard things come up and we just kick it down the road. And the next board gets it and they have something else that's a priority and it doesn't get done. So I would urge you to at least pass it the First Street Overlay District as our staff recommended. I'm just telling you that I feel like if you miss this opportunity and this comes up again in 5 years, you're going to have to wait for the next comp plan, which is 8 years away. You know, we only do that once every 10 years. So that's my piece of it. We did our best. I will tell you, a lot of good considerations from the chief, a lot of good things that he had to say. We didn't consider any of it. That wasn't our purview. So, you know, I could certainly understand why the 35-foot compromise would need to be something you'd need to look at, but please don't just push it off for something that, and then we'll get to it another day. Because those other days, you know, things happen, like a shopping center fire and the Eldora purchase opportunity and other things come up and then it just disappears. That's all I have to say. I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Jim. Questions for Jim?
I have a question for Jim. To Tanya. Jim, I agree with you 100% about we got to get it done. We got to stop procrastinating things or whatever. We've seen it happen. I'm curious about the 200 feet continuous. Was that in the sub area plan? I don't have it memorized. Or where did you guys get that number? Because when I put it in relation to the BNF and thinking about First Street and having it just be one long building, where did that come from? I'm just curious.
So there was some recommendations before we started working that number in our work sessions. So the initial number that was recommended, I believe, was 250 feet that came from the sub area plan, if you look in that. And part of what we did was we looked at the front of how big First Street was from Snyder's Garage down to the Rock Shop, and doing the same kind of quick math that Trustee Larson did, we came up with about 540 feet. And literally the work sessions that we had with Mr. Mitchell and with the public and with the folks that were there, we came up with the compromise of, okay, you know, we can do something that's not more than half a block long for that particular space. And that was where the compromise landed, that if we had 250 feet with the setbacks and everything, it might exceed the boundaries of that. So that's where the 200-foot recommendation came from.
Okay. No, thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
I just asked the additional clarifying. So the intent was that the length of First Street, it was acceptable to have that be 2 buildings long.
Up to 2 separated long buildings. Yes, with and if you look at the plans, there's actually a service, I don't know, street you would call, that also had some open space for deliveries in between them. So that was part of what we felt was important. Yes.
There was some building articulation at 40-foot intervals, if you remember, on the facade of to break up the.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I forgot about that. Yes. And if you look at the some of the renderings that they have on there, one of the things they talked about was they didn't want it to look like one big monolithic building. That was the feedback that we got. We didn't want to have something that looked like when you went into Blackhawk and you just had the setback purpose. I can kind of talk to that. I forgot about that, was because we didn't want to have that canyon effect as you went down First Street. And since we were recommending the additional height to try and accommodate the business space and, you know, additional use, that we talked about, that second floor step back would significantly reduce. And if you look at some of those renderings, you'll see, you know, it doesn't have that towering over effect But each individual storefront or building would not have a larger than 40-foot facade, so it would have to be broken up. So it might be 200 feet long, but in that distance, you're going to have 5 different architectural changes to make it not look like one big mega building.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you
I
for
just-
reminding me of that, John. I forgot about that.
I just was pulling up the sub-area plan. It kind of, at least one of the renderings looks like maybe they kind of broke it up into four building sections, or sort of 2 building sections, and then that throughway connecting First and Second Street. And then there's sort of a larger building, but it's sort of broken into 2 pieces with the opening in there. So you sort of had 4, which would sort of make that more like 100-foot sections.
Well, they're just facades. The fronts are just I can't see what you're looking
Yeah,
at
I'm just
from there, but
yeah.
what the intent was that it could be a building of width for scale. And I'm sure Mr. Mitchell is going to get up and tell you some of the reasons why. We had, like I said, we had sessions with him, and we did the public engagements process. Basically, what we tried to do is compromise with what we thought could be something that he as a developer could work with, and something that the community also said, yes, this is what we would like to see, and we're okay with that. Again, I just say if another board considers this, we kind of looked at it like the fire department has a sign off on every single building permit that comes down. They have a approval, no approval, and the town has never approved a building that the fire department has not approved. So at any time until they can figure out how to mitigate, whether it's, building size, material, height, through fire suppression systems, until he can be convinced, that building's not going to get built anyway. So, my theory on that is, you start to open a big can of worms, you say, oh, we can't rebuild the shopping center in the same footprint because it was 300 plus feet long. Ooh, man. I mean, now you're opening a lot of stuff. So I'm just going to say again, we're your code people. We did the work. The process is here. We're offering it up to you. If you pick too hard, you can spend the next 6 months, trying to find ways, and you'll come up with something. It may or may not be better than what we're offering you, but this is a result of the public engagement process and a lot of work, and a work with the major property owner in the downtown area.
Thank you.
More questions for Jim?
I appreciate your consideration on this. And like I said, some of you know that I've been here to present parking stuff before this BOT multiple times, and we still haven't gone forward on parking. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying other things have come up. We haven't been able to do it. This is an opportunity for you guys to pass this, get it done, and move forward. And as John said, it can always be amended at a later time if need be. But this is the time when you have the credibility of the process and all the hard work. And I will tell you, I'll be a little discouraged if it comes out that, no, we're just going to kick it down the road for further study. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Any more questions for staff, Jim or Charlie, for public comment?
I'd like to ask Chief Schmidtman another question. How much does a new 75-foot truck cost?
A little over 2 million.
Okay, and then used by 10 years.
750.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing I just kind of want to add is so we can fix a lot of the length in fire code. So I don't want that to be the defining factor here. So we can, we can set things up as far as where ladder truck access could be in the with the building. There are things in fire code that we can adjust, firewalls and things like that. So I don't want the length to be the defining factor here. So I don't want to open up this can of worms that maybe wouldn't be appropriate for the height discussion.
Well, but it sounds like there are 2 components, like you've said. There is both the length, but there is also the height. And you have also mentioned that you are already at a structural disadvantage even for servicing height-related incidents?
So we are and we aren't. So we are because ideally a ladder truck is the kind of the gold standard.
Yeah.
We do have some really long extension ladders. We can do some stuff with ground ladders.
Oh, interesting.
So we do have that ability as well.
Okay.
It's just that, like I said, the gold standard, especially if we have to do things on the roof.
Yeah.
You have a 45-foot building. We can no longer do it with a ground ladder.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
All right, and it sounds like you guys have some tricks up your sleeve. We can
do.
modify.
We do.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
great.
Quick
Thanks.
question. So is it as simple as just buying the truck, or is there more to it when you get a 75-foot ladder?
Well,
Is there
again,
training?
it's the infrastructure with the town. So the
So-
turning radiuses, there will be setbacks, on the corners. We'll have to look at it again when the plans come to the department, so where can we set an engine up? So when you think about the First Street, Bridge Street, Snyder, Second Street, one of those places or two of those places are going to be on the highway. And that creates more challenges, especially, we saw some of that at the Caribou Village fire, so we had to block off access on two sides because of, one reason was placement of the aerial and one was placement of where the hydrants were.
Mhm.
So we had to cross the road, we had to cross Lakeview because the hydrant was on the other side of Lakeview.
Mhm.
And so, that limits the access to additional engines when they're coming in.
And if something were, let's say, okay, we got these building plans, cool. We want to set up so that we can have the right distances, so we can hit the top of the ceiling. At that point, just for sort of everyone's awareness, you would potentially go back to that developer and say, not safe, you need to push back the front setback by maybe another 10 feet or something like that. Those are the conversations that
Yep,
you would have.
We could,
Okay,
but we're also trying to be sympathetic to the builders.
sure.
Right? And
I
so
totally get that.
I don't want to waste anybody's time, effort, money when, if you bring something that's unrealistic that we can't meet the expectation, they spend the time and effort to put it through plan, create the plan and go through engineering and all of that stuff. And then it comes to us and we're like, nope.
Right. But
Right,
you
so-
you're typically involved a lot sooner
Yeah.
than, yeah. Okay.
But the plan, normally plans before engineering, but
Yeah.
Even the plans take time and yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Just,
you.
just say, so what about, one other consideration with a bigger truck is what about electrical, things in the air?
Yep.
So they would have to be raised in
Yep.
places
Absolutely.
all over town?
No, not all over town, because the truck isn't really much taller driving around. It's only taller when you're putting the aerial up.
Okay.
So, and there'll have to be a lot of adjustments on First Street anyway,
Anyway.
if
when we
and when a building goes up, yeah, so.
Yeah. Any development that's down there
Yep.
will require those things to come into compliance and, yeah.
Yep.
That's a good point.
So just to clarify, we've talked about a few different things that might concern you about the district's ability to service these types of buildings. But the main issue that we're looking at now is height, and you
Correct.
recommend 35 feet.
Correct.
Okay.
Real quick, like on places where you'd have to widen turning radiuses or raise electric wires or bury them,
Mhm.
which our engineer tells us Sturgeon really doesn't like burying things. They like putting poles in the ground. So, but regarding that, when you say part of the town, like which parts of the town, how extensive is that, or is it not extensive? Like these kinds of,
It's a ladder truck's not any taller than an 18-wheeler that's bringing, delivering food like Cisco or something
Okay.
like that. So
okay, cool. And then this turning radiuses. would it
turning
just be-
radius is a bit more because the wheelbase is so much longer. So a tractor trailer, kind of I don't want to say in the middle, but kind of breaks in the middle so it can articulate around a corner. And so a ladder truck does not, or at least the ladder trucks that we would be looking at, the ones that articulate or tillers, you see them in like New York City and big cities like that. We're not looking at that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
With that, is there any more questions for staff? Charlie or John? Jim? If not, we'll move to public comment. We'll start in the room. Any public comment on the overlay district? And you can go first if you like, Ron, in the room. Oh yeah, go for it. We'll go online and we'll give you time when you come back. Anyone in the room have comments on this? If not, folks online, does anyone online have a public comment? Doesn't really look like it.
This is David Seitz. Can
Oh,
you hear
David,
me?
great. Yes, go for it.
Yeah, I was looking at one of the pages there. I think it was scene 5 and started combining all the rules together. And it looked to me like First Street is almost becoming an historic district. Because most of the buildings there are basically one story. And if you say that any building on there, any building close to it has to be in scale with it, then it limits that in that sense. And then on Second Street, the logical consequence to that would be a strip mall, because nowhere in this drawing, in this project, is any parking considered. So someone, as of right now, Ron Mitchell provides that parking, but if the next developer or whatever would put a strip mall in there, that I'm quite confident. I don't think that's your intention. The other thing is that in 2012, our basic orientation was to go up rather than out. And it looks like our direction here, when you combine it with the ski resort, is to squash the downtown development, keep it down. And then with the annexations, which will come with the Eldora purchase, we're going out, which is a very different direction than I think we wanted to go. So anyway, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Any other public comments, folks online? If not, let's just take a 5-minute bathroom break. I'm going to take it anyway, since we're waiting on Ron. I want to hear what he has to say. So we'll take 5 minutes. We'll be back here at 8, I'll say 6 minutes, 8:45. No, and we have two non-agenda subjects. I'm totally fine with it. Yeah, I wish it's done that. Finish this discussion and. As long as the First Amendment freaks don't show up. That's why we need to. Research whether that's still happening and think about moving it again.
Ron Mitchell, 380 South Jackson.
Just a sec, Ron, I gave people, is everyone back? Tanya and Andrew, are you both with us?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. All right, go ahead, Ron.
My first comment is that I think if I only get 3 minutes to speak, it's one of the most unfair processes in this case that I've ever seen.
It's going to be 3 minutes, but I'll start it when you start talking about.
Well, the first thing is I am going to have to condense my arguments in my presentation to much more condensed presentation. So I'm going to start with this. John Kane study showed, I think, 6 or 8 towns, all of which have a height limit of near 30 or 40, 32 feet. Let's take the example of Estes Park currently just raised their height limit to 42 feet. I think you need some time to ask them why. Why did they do this? And that's one thing I think you need some more time to study what's going on here. Then we go to Central City. Central City has no ladder trucks, whatever. They have a height limit of 50 feet, and all of the buildings that they have are required to have either standpipes and or included sprinkler systems. So I submit to you that there are other totally unstudied methods of fighting fire, and you can be done. I bought the 2004 650-page International Fire Code and read it. And when I got to the last index, it says Index A as a process for appeals, to where a group or a board of professionals can consider viable alternatives to the presentation that only a ladder truck or 2 ladder trucks is what would be sufficient, or the only thing available for a development over 35 feet. This has gone on, as Jim Reed said, for more than 2 years. And I've, at this meeting, come to the conclusion, and I think I've said it before, but it's solidified, that if there is no increase in the height limit to where it's viable, it's not commercially viable for me. Might be for somebody else. And so I think you're probably going to look, if I live 10 years, another 10 years before we try it again. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Any other public comments? Public comment is now closed. So before we move into deliberation, are there any board questions for staff or Charlie or Jim related to issues just based on, more time and hearing public comment?
Sean, can you just clarify? I know this was in your aim, but I just want to be really clear that if we were to say 35 feet, that would be like right by use, right? That you wouldn't have to go through a special review process. But if somebody did want to build above 35 feet, they might be able to. They would just have to apply for a special review use permit. Is that right?
Not quite.
Okay.
The special review use
Mm-hmm.
that would be available would be for appurtenances essentially on the roof. So if there's a parapet or some kind of antenna or something on the roof, you could go through a special review use. So if the building height was at 35 feet, you could go above that with those extra pieces, and that would be a special review use. In my staff report, I also noted that you have legislative power over this ordinance essentially at any time, and that's a power of the Board of Trustees by statute. And so if you wanted to modify the ordinance because fire capacity changed or there was something that changed in the equation, you could do that when you wanted to do that. So that is a path forward as well as that legislative zoning change that could happen.
Thanks, John.
I'm sorry, I have a clarification. That would need to happen. If you had an application, they would be applying under the current use by right standards. So that would have to be outside of that application process, because essentially applications apply under the standards that exist today.
John, this is Tanya. Currently though, a person could apply for a special review use to go above 35 feet.
Yes, and the CBD has certain triggers that allow or that require a PUD. And when you get to a PUD, the challenge with that is that it requires negotiation of building standards. And so in bigger development swaths, that allows for like contextually sensitive solutions to whatever that building swath requires. But in the CBD, those slots are so small that it really creates, for all intents and purposes, a spot zoning effect, because not all the standards are the same. And spot zoning is typically a practice that means that different lots have different rules, and typically it's a best practice in zoning to try to keep things consistent with different districts.
Okay. So if we did the first street overlay district, that right no longer exists to apply for a special review, SRU.
No, you could still apply for a special review use. You could also apply for a PUD, but the difference would be is that after that January 1st, 2026 date that is currently in the ordinance, then new PUDs would have to comply to the overlay standards that are set within the ordinance before you.
Okay.
Or whatever you discussed or you decided to approve.
Any more clarifying questions or questions? If not, we will now move into our deliberation with the BOT, and I'm going to focus on policy considerations and the direction we wish to provide to staff.
One of the things that I feel like we haven't dove into yet, which I'm particularly curious about, I went down a rabbit hole of looking at the Urban Land Institute and what they recommend for different retail spaces, different types of uses of buildings. And it's a little interesting. For retail spaces, they recommend a minimum height of 12 feet to 16 feet. For restaurants, they suggest at least 10, or they suggest 10 feet. For classrooms, training rooms, 10 to 12 feet. And with those also, I just sort of lightly asked, like, what is recommended in terms of like the spaces or the infrastructure, the sprinklers that are necessary in between each of those floors. And it seems to go between 2 to 3 feet. And so if we were looking at, let's say, retail space of 12 feet at a minimum, which is what they minimally recommended, you would be able to do 3 floors, which comes, but only, well, I guess in this instance, it would only be the bottom that would potentially have that retail space. But if you did 12 on the bottom and then went 3 feet up, that's 22. 32, 20, 12, 22, 32, you don't have space in between the floors for that additional infrastructure. And so that's kind of like another piece that I guess, I would be interested. Why did Estes Park increase their height if that was actually a thing? Was it for attracting more development? Was it for giving a little bit more flexibility? And the other piece that I was going to say about that is, understanding on the length that maybe the 200 feet, like that is, open, and feel like maybe needs more time to think about that as well. But these whole pieces of what is going to make for good spaces is just a conversation that I don't think that we've like really dove into. And again, this is my very limited research on Urban Land Institute. And, but I'm kind of curious, would love to dive into that a little bit more.
I do know the answer to that question.
For what? For Estes Park?
Yeah, their planning documents say that the reason is 42 feet allows for a little bit easier build for a 3-story mixed-use building, specifically to create affordable housing units in the downtown mixed-use development with affordable housing involved.
I will say, having worked on these kind of projects presently and in the past, the first floor, when you do mixed space, it's the first floor that's commercial, and 12 feet is reasonable. I think when you go above that, I also do energy efficiency. So a lot of what we do is like, building that thinks about ongoing costs. So there's construction costs. So more materials is more money, more labor is more money. But then there's also operations and maintenance. So when you have these high ceilings, you're heating, cooling, and ventilating air that no one will ever exist in. And so the bottom floor is where it makes the most sense to have a little more headroom, for a business. But I mean, and I've been paying attention to this for the last couple of years, just when I travel for work, just, with these plans here. And, how many hotels I'm in, and I'm on the 14th floor, and it's an 8-foot ceiling, and it's 9-foot ceilings, 8-foot ceilings. If you get into places where there's a bunch of lodging above, you're talking 8-foot, 9-foot ceilings. And the floors, 2 feet is probably plenty. I think when you go to say 2 to 3 feet can be overly generous, and it depends what your HVAC system is. Like you definitely have sprinkler systems, but it's the ductwork that really kind of takes up space, and then there's sound insulation. But more and more ducts are, they're going to compact duct design, or if you go to individual units in the room, like heat pumps or something, or the PTACs, or not PTAC, but the units that are in the room, then you do away with a lot of ductwork. Or if you have it, you can definitely use 2 feet floors, but beyond that, you start to really just spend money, really.
But I guess my question there is, if a developer chooses to increase retail height in order for it to be, as the Urban Land Institute, this was, what they said in terms of like those preferred ceiling heights, it's like higher ceilings create a sense of openness and allow for more designs, including tall display fixtures and enhanced lighting schemes. And retailers actually value this vertical space for signage and branding opportunities, which can attract customers and enhance the overall shopping experience. And so, the debate of, well, it costs more to heat and whatnot, like that's a developer. Sorry?
That's a renter cost, though. It's a developer consideration, but it's the renters, the long-term renters who pay for all this stuff.
Potentially, but like, what is the difference of that? I mean, if we're talking about the difference between a 12-foot retail space and 16 feet, like, I want to know what is the potential, difference on that. And like you're saying, everything is becoming more compact and efficient. So where is the upside in terms of like, I get to gain on this side in order to have higher ceilings and a better experience for retailers, right? Those are conversations that we haven't had here.
They are. I mean, that's the conversation that I was in that first work session with the planning commission, and 43 feet was what the 300 plus people had said okay to, and this magical 2 feet was added to it because, the downtown developer said, I need 14-foot ceilings, and everyone's like, well, it's only 2 feet, and it's like, okay, so we'll go to 45, but like, if it's only 2 feet, then why did they add it? And it's just, it really does add initial cost and ongoing costs that will make these commercial spaces and potentially these, lodging spaces expensive. They'll have to recoup their costs. And I don't know what kind of businesses we'll end up with filling those. Will it be local artisans? And, Jim and I had this spirited discussion over here during the holiday market. I said, most all the folks in this holiday market will be forever, selling their wares at holiday markets and farmers markets, or, some of the other commercial space around town, but they'll be boxed out of this kind of opportunity. We'll be looking at chains and franchises and corporate stores.
I think what we also need to be really careful of is saying that this is going to happen, because we have control over some of that. We have controls over working with the developer, and just like we do from an affordable housing standpoint of putting some of those conditions and those constraints in place. And so I don't want us to get into like a really slippery slope of X equals Y, but kind of keep open the conversation and the discussion. And I'm just pointing out that we haven't had the discussion of what is going to be for effective retail space, what is going to be for effective retail space for us to think about, not just now, but into the future as Nederland looks to, build its capacity. Because as we pointed out, we can only go up. I would disagree with the public comment from David Seitz that there has been no shift or change to go out. It is still, at least among many folks on the board, to take what we have and opportunize it to go up. So
I would just say, going in and discussing whether it's a 10-foot ceiling, 12, that's the slippery slope. That that is not where we should be doing. We're trying to decide what the overlay district, what fits within the character of the downtown area, what the town can support, and that's it. I mean, that's where we should be looking. I mean, we could discuss, whether you need 2 feet between the floor or 3 feet or blue in the face. None of us are experts in that.
Yeah.
We need to bring it.
Yes,
but
agreed.
it's also irrelevant to this discussion, because what we can decide is what fits and what we can support is X. How you partition that, that's for architects and the creative designers to work with, and setting them the envelope in which they can design. That's our job, not telling them how to do it.
I would agree to a certain extent. Where ceiling height becomes important is like that overall number, right? So if we're taking into consideration that there are recommendations from like an urban
12 foot or 3 foot, and then an 8.82, that's 35.
Right, but in terms of like actual retail, what's recommended, I just think that we shouldn't lock ourselves in, number one. But number two, it sounds like there are mechanisms through which, like fire and, chief, they can say, we need a wider street. There happens to be a mechanism, or that we have one developer that owns most of First Street that's like, hey, if you want a higher building height, we need a wider street. We need to make the street 35 or 45 feet.
Which just drives up their costs more and more and more. If that same developer is paying for materials and labor, of whatever design they decide, and now all of a sudden they're widening streets and dealing with electrical wires, paying PIF fees, I mean, the cost of this is going to be astronomical. Those corporate franchises and those chain stores will change the character of the town way more than 10 feet heights. It's going to be who can afford to actually go into those buildings later?
Well, so granting right-of-way access off of land was not necessarily what I was thinking in terms of that it was going to cost more. Like, so if we're granted, more of that square footage for road access, right? That's probably not much of a nominal cost. I don't disagree that then, to widen the street, but it sounds like it's a safety issue anyway. And it's something that we should be cognizant of anyway, both the town and the developer. So it's something that we should think about regardless of what we're talking about in the height of buildings.
That makes sense. I do worry about when you say the town and the builder would, the town costs too, what will the town have to
Well, I mean, I was
pay
wondering,
for? Go ahead.
I was wondering if we could bring Ron back to, he had always discussed widening the street in his initial plans. Is that still, like, and not every developer is required to do so, right? But wasn't that something?
He had
is out
offered
there
that, but I think
crossing?
we can't, these plans are not for one person. I mean, that always needs to be,
Understood,
it's always
understood, but
thought about. It's more about thinking about any other, just anybody who owns this. And,
Well, sure.
Ron
but
has talked about being
If
more,
we
giving more
increase
of
the
that.
height to like 43 feet for pitched roof, there could also be a stipulation that, road must be widened. There can be things, we are in the process right here. I don't want to do what Jim says that we're going to do, which is kick this down and put more regulations in. But there are things we could do. We can say, hey, you're going to go 43 feet, 45 feet. You got to widen the road so that if it's 45 feet then, or you got to put fire escapes for everybody, or things like that, or it can only be 25% of the mass can be that high. I mean, we can write it in right now. I'm not saying we're experts in that, but I think we all been talking about this for years, actually. Not all of us, but a lot of us.
Well,
So
here's an idea, it was actually written and just not talked about by I don't know if John read it or just glazed over and I didn't hear it, but on page 44, and this makes sense when you think about fire, you've got that, let's say, a 35-foot roof. Either way, it's going to be a 35-foot eave, on that third floor. You have windows there. If you go up, the first two floor goes up about, say, 25 feet.
yeah,
You got that high point, and then it goes in 20
then
feet.
there's a setback.
And then you have the third story. This is an idea. I mean, I love the setback personally, but if we, as a compromise, didn't do the setback, like it says here, where staff recommends that the board also consider removing the requirement for a 20-foot step back for third stories if the height is lowered to 35 feet. And what that would do for a 200-foot long building, if they could now build that 20 feet out to the floor, to the road, so you have one face. It means the ladder can just go to the one point, which is the top of the third floor versus trying to arch over the top of the second floor. And they get 4,000 more square feet to build in. Maybe not the height, but 200 feet long, let's say max building length on First Street, 20 feet in, that'd be 4,000 more square feet to build in. So maybe they're
Yeah.
not getting the height, but they'd be getting more.
Yeah, but
square
that
footage.
setback is what keeps us from getting that canyon effect. So,
Yep. I mean, it's just an idea.
I'm at this point, I'm just willing to personally go with the planning commission recommendations and personally, and then we're talking the canyon look and not having the setback. Maybe 20 feet's too much. Maybe it only needs to be 10, but again, then we're keep kicking it down. I think there's a lot of good ideas for this. And I mean, I'm not opposed to continuing this conversation. But we are gonna have a change of board soon, so it would be good to come up with something before that happens, but I'm willing to go with planning commission recommendation.
Others?
Even though I don't think it's perfect.
I'm concerned about operational capacity and I'm concerned about public safety. I know that I think there's always things to balance. I understand where developers are coming from in terms of commercially viable properties. I think our job is to balance these issues and to kind of assess them. And from my perspective, hearing Chief Schmidtman today, I think the public safety concern outweighs the need for the 12, like the concerns about what would attract more retailers, at least right now, based on our limitations because of the one, ladder truck and our limited capacity right now. So I would be inclined to take staff's recommendation and the district's recommendation of limiting to 35 feet and then, taking some action now with the idea that things could always change in the future as we learn more about the capacity of the district, or as things could change, or as we get more research about different things that we could do to try to mitigate the risks involved. But knowing that we just had a major fire and it can happen again, it worries me to go just fly in the face of a recommendation from the fire district.
I'm going to definitely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, Jim Reese's advice of, let's do something and not further postpone this. I mean, I know there's a lot of discussions. Those guys had a lot of discussions. I know the Planning Commission has done the deep dive on this. One thing, I mean, Nicole bringing up the, heights for retail and space between the floors. I've heard Ron talk about this before of like the need for, good height for retail. It's important for the success. Just some back of the napkin math, kind of what you were trying to do, Nicole, a 15-foot first floor, assuming 2 feet between floors. I mean, we're just kind of guessing 9-foot ceilings for residential above. You can get 3 floors at 37 feet. If you do 12-foot floors and 10-foot ceilings on up above, you get 36 feet. So, I would be in favor of like, let's, we're not architects, we're not engineers, we're not retail building designers, but we're close, right? At 35 feet, seems like these are within reasonable guesstimations of what that space needs to be successful.
Just want to remember that the SRU for things on the roof does exist, and that can be mechanical equipment that does give you some additional building envelope.
Right. Yeah.
And that would be through the SRU process.
Right. So maybe we want to make this 37 feet but in general, I feel like we should take staff's advice, take Chief Schmidtman's advice, and realize that we can adjust down the road if we need to. And, I would be curious to know Ron's input on how, because I have heard him say this before, if you need this much height for it to work. So is 15 feet on the first floor and 2 9-foot ceilings above, does that work? I mean, that seems important, but, and to Tanya's point about the canyon effect, which I feel is especially relevant for us because we're going from 15 to 20-foot tall buildings, we're almost doubling that, or maybe even actually doubling it. And it's going to be a shocker, right? So even a 10-foot setback on that upper floor might make a huge difference. So, I don't know that we need to put that in this ordinance, or rather it's just something that we consider when we're reviewing building permits. But I do think we should get to a point tonight where we can give staff a direction to say, look, bring us back an ordinance that we can pass.
And remember, it was recommended by Chief to not have the setback.
Well, and
up
I'd
at
be
the
curious,
top.
like if it was say it's a 6-foot setback, like anything that just kind of breaks up that big wall, like that, is a 6-foot setback on a 35-foot building, enough of a triangle? I don't know. But
yeah,
20 feet,
point.
obviously, like that, you can see that makes it hard.
Yeah.
so an outstanding question from you is like, is there a setback amount that is workable?
But I feel like that's not necessarily necessary for this ordinance, right? Like, I think that's something could be done in fire code, in the building permit process when they're doing the fire code review. John?
I think that won't work in practical.
Yeah.
I think that it needs to be a part of the ordinance what that standard would be. But if you did give us direction, we could provide you with a little
Research.
bit more research about that if we were able to bring an ordinance in close to final form.
Yeah.
That'd be great, because just do a little math on what those angles would be from a 6-foot setback, a 10-foot setback, 20-foot setback.
And I think having that in the ordinance, I think is the other piece that comes to this is it then provides, if, as long as it's in the ordinance and everything's in the ordinance, then any developer kind of knows the rules. There's
Right.
not a chance of, well, I know it's not in there, but the fire
Right.
code or in the
Right.
other case,
Right.
if, you know,
Yeah.
if we put 45 feet in here and then somebody brings plans and chief says, I can't give you a certificate, we can't approve this because we can't service it. It
Right.
gives that uncertainty
Right.
to the developers. Setting at 35 with some kind of known setback,
Right.
again, what research will show, then provides certainty for all parties.
Right. The one other thing I just had a thought, I mean, I hadn't thought about the length of the building until Chief Schmidtman brought it up. But I did look at the renderings from the sub area plan, and they do have it broken up into, you know, relatively 4-foot sections with some throughway space in between those. So it's not a facade. It's like, there's definitely a gap between these things. And it's just the renderings that are in the sub area plans, not nothing significant, but John?
The ordinance requires building articulation at 40 feet, and that could be through the use of columns or storefronts or awnings or anything like that.
Yeah.
So what the effect of that building will be, it will look like buildings
No,
with no step.
yeah, I get that. I'm just trying to address this, like, is a 200-foot building, regardless of what it looks like, is the actual structure, like, is that something we need to address? Like, I'm just looking at the renderings. They've got clearly 4 segments that are not visual. They're actually like structurally separated buildings.
It also requires things like plazas or courtyards along the articulation of the front of the building too, to break up space, and their ordinance is written right now.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, is that something we need to address in this ordinance? To make that, you know, Chief Schmidtman said 100 feet, like, and I kind of get, like, if you have a continuous 200-foot wall, regardless of what it looks like, if that thing falls, you have a 200-foot wall falling up. If it's 100-foot or 50-foot sections and it falls, you have a 50-foot section that's falling and not taking out the whole street. So I'm just wondering if that, I mean, to me, it's an open question of, is this something we should address? It wasn't on the radars, on the aim, but it does seem to make sense to me that we would not want that kind of risk, but the shopping center was many hundreds of feet, but whatever fire walls it had in it did not do the trick, so. Yeah, but it didn't work, right? So like,
Yeah.
that's a eye opener to say, oh yeah, we'll just put in some firewalls. Well, that firewall didn't work. So to me, that says,
I mean, there was only
I'd
one.
rather see those be separated buildings.
More comments from folks who haven't spoken yet?
Yeah, I'll speak. The issue with the firewall at the 20 Lakeview is because of the way that the deck basically became a corridor for fire flow. So because the firewall didn't extend through that egress portion of the building, it created basically a horizontal tornado, if you will. When y'all appointed me to the Board of Trustees, I mentioned my desire to utilize the comprehensive plan as a master document, and I believe that the staff recommendations adhere to that. Let's see, page 144 of the docket states limiting building heights to 35 feet to preserve historic character. And page 27 of the downtown sub-area plan, I think it's page 82 of packet. The lowest ranking buildings located on the very bottom row there are buildings that have prominent height, but also are above 35 feet. And I think viewing this input, all the architectural styles that scored high were of lower building height, all within that 35-foot range. So I believe I'll be on the side of going with the staff recommendation.
Thanks, Andrew. Chris?
Oh, I chimed in earlier. Yeah, 35 with the staff recommendation, 35 feet for many regions.
Well, that is already at the majority, and I think I concur for numerous reasons, some of which I stated before, but I do think reading this entire aim and the last one and the quotes from the comp plan and the sub-area plan, I also agree with the 35-foot. So it seems like where we're at, 5 of us at least, is directing staff to present an ordinance establishing the FSOD with establishing a maximum building height of 35 feet for all roof types. And the request for direction, I'd say the majority is that is the request for direction, or that is the direction. My one thought that didn't dawn on me till this was read earlier tonight is that 2 more meetings have to happen for this to be.
Yep.
I told you wrong. This is not adoption by reference, so you only have to have one.
Okay,
One reading.
because I was kind of, okay, good. That threw me.
But what about the design considerations?
We have to
What-
publish.
I mean,
Yeah.
does anybody have, we need to specify those
Just
as well,
one,
or do we just want to just be
just one
like,
sec,
let it-
Tanya. Jennifer was clarifying
We
something.
need 30 days. About 15.
Okay,
So
well,
then that puts it in April.
Is that 15 days from when? Okay, right, so 15 days before we're gonna vote on it, we have to have it. Okay. Yeah,
okay.
right.
But I know we're talking about rescheduling a meeting,
Yeah.
so it could happen in an off meeting like on the 31st in 4 weeks. Okay.
No.
One of the things also that we did not talk about, if there was an in-between height. And I don't know if that was, because we asked specifically about 35 feet. And if 43 feet isn't amenable, is there, I don't know, Chief Schmidtman, if there was a number in between that, or if it was a cutoff at 35.
Do you mind coming to the podium just so folks online can hear you? It goes on the record.
So I would say most of the things that we've researched has hit the 35 mark. 40 is going to be slightly better, so I'm not going to try to sway either way.
I see.
Okay. So we can hit 45 if we have to. We can hit 40 if we have to. It still depends on the things that I previously discussed about the clapstones, the ladder placement, length of the building with where we're going to place our apparatus, ground ladders, that sort of thing. So the longest ground ladder we have is about 35 feet. And so you can't go straight up. So you have to give some distance. So at 40 foot, it's going to also depend on where the windows are when we're talking about a rescue.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So 35 really kind of enforces the height of the third floor windows.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And so thank you. Appreciate that.
I wanted to touch
Tanya, go
on
ahead.
the design standards aspect of it all. Because at this point, I don't really, if we just pass this 35 feet and don't get into design standards, I don't really see we've done anything different than that's already there. My biggest worry is that Ron says it's not viable. He's been always very amenable to dealing with the public, and he sells to a person who doesn't care and builds exactly as to what we have in our code. If we don't have some design standards in this First Street overlay sub area plan, we are not going to have a say other than 35 feet. If that's literally the only hill that people care about, then I'm very concerned. I think we need to have design standards in code. I've been saying this for a while. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to get what you get, and it's going to be exactly what we don't want, probably. So can we give staff direction as to the design standard aspect of this? I understand the majority of people want 35 feet. That's fine. What is 200 feet okay? Do we want to dictate a change in siding materials to create spaces that don't look homogeneous?
Is there
Do
some
we want-
design criteria in
Those
this
are
already?
not, those are,
I'm
no, Billy,
misunderstanding
those
you.
have nothing to, those are not, those are recommendations. They're literally suggestions. And nobody cares about those. Nobody's gonna read them and nobody's bound to it as a bill, as a contractor. We have these design standards that somebody made like 30 years ago, and they're actually pretty good. But there's nothing binding in it, and we've
No,
discussed this
I agree.
ad
In those
nauseam.
design standards, I agree, but isn't there some design
No.
standards in this whole overlay district design that came from the planning commission that
Yeah.
A little
there-
bit,
there-
and like,
they talk
and
about
that's what
building
John
materials
wants us to
and
recommend. Do we want to recommend those two? The because right now we've just been hyper focused on the height, but
I think the height is I think we're agreeing with everything else that the PC had said, which includes some design standards. So,
Well, but the
I'm-
step backs, the third story step backs.
well, okay, that is the one thing we're talking about. You're right. is
And also the
possible.
length of the building. These have to be written into it, and I would agree. I don't know if.
I
we're-
don't see anything about design standards, just but I like the 20% needs to be open space. Is that what's going to be brought back to you guys? I mean, I probably won't be here for the final vote. That's why I'm concerned. So
Tanya, if you look
just-
at page 49 of the packet,
Thank you.
there's some exterior materials and roof forms. There's a whole section about building design standards. I don't know how detailed you're looking for, but it talks about the type of materials that you can or can't use, the roof forms that you can or can't use, what the facade should look like. And that's in the ordinance itself.
49. Okay, great. I'll go
Yeah,
look at that. Let's
It
see.
starts on the bottom of page 40. It's section 16-326, building design standards, and then it lists them.
But as Nicole said, there
And
is
that
too-
is in the ordinance.
Yes,
Yeah.
but as Nicole said, there is that 200-foot building length in there. It is like, and my question, is that something we want to address in addition to this height thing? So my vote would be yes, but I'm open.
And do we need additional information and another conversation about it?
Personally, I don't, but if other people feel like they need more information, we could, I'd like to not extend this beyond, another meeting. I'd like to be able to have staff bring this back and at least in some close enough to final draft that we could potentially pass it.
I think we talked about already that they could come back to us with different setback,
Recommendation.
geometry. And then I'd say if there's a concern on building length, that we could ask for the same thing.
Yeah,
a building
we can think about the building lengths because that's a fairly simple thing to, as we discuss it at the next meeting, say, okay, we're going to pass this with 100 foot, 200 foot,
But
based on our research and, conversations we have.
But if the question is coming back before us is like, hey, here are different recommendations for a setback, that sounds like it's a discussion. It doesn't sound like it's going to be in ordinance form for the next meeting.
No, there can be options
John,
in ordinance form.
What do you
We've had
think?
Many times before where,
Oh, actually, go ahead, finish that thought.
yeah, I mean, we've done this before where we have a couple different options and thoughts for the ordinance, and it's written up in the ordinance such that, you know, it could be like, you know, you're gonna pass it and you amend it on the night as like with the setback of 6 feet and a building length of 100 feet, or setback, no setback and a building length of 200 feet, whatever the parameters would come to our final discussion in, you say that in the motion for the ordinance and then it's done.
If we are having two of those components that we're having to negotiate, building length, setback, you're saying that then,
You can write the ordinance so that you set those that night. So we can get this done with this board. Because like Jim said, you know, if this
Yeah.
doesn't get done, then this could very well drag on
Yeah.
or just be dropped. And so,
Yeah, most of all, I don't want to see that
yeah,
happen.
be okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is one thing we
can
we agree to.
Can we ask Jim to pop back up for a second?
Jim, would love to.
But on,
Yes, sir.
on this building length issue, you know, obviously, you know, you gave a brief statement before of like how you came to 200 feet. Considering all of this discussion, you know, do you think there's some space from the perspective of the planning commission that we should adjust that?
No, I don't think you should adjust it at all. I think, so part of what I did not say was that when we talked and we're dealing with our developers, or I'm sorry, with our subject matter experts, the SE group and Cheney Boswick, was they did a detailed look of like structures in town. How we ended up coming up with 43 feet was based on Kathmandu Village and Kathmandu Plaza and Tungsten Village and the fire department. These are already buildings that are of this size and scope in our community. And the shopping center, of course, we know was over 300 feet. So I understand what the chief says, and everyone would love to get everything we want, right?
Yeah.
But at some point, you got to say, okay, we got to stop picking at all the details and say, we're going to pass the 85% solution that meets the majority of our goal, and we're going to advance it. I don't think you should change the setbacks. I don't think you should change the building length. If you're going to change anything, I think you should go with at least the 43 foot height, which is what the community said we would be okay with. But if you're going to have something, I would recommend that you pass everything with just the change to 35 feet.
So you mentioned the fire station and the shopping center and Caribou Village, but like none of those are in the very dense section of downtown, which seems like if you wanted to try and take any of those buildings and put them on First Street, it would be pretty weird. Right?
I think if you measured the current contiguous building that the covered wagon is in and the rock shop and all that
It's about
until it gets to
200
Wings
feet.
of Lace, we looked at that. We pulled up renderings, we pulled up Google Earth, and we looked at what was going to be, and we talked this through in work sessions, and we said, okay, what would not overwhelm this building, this block, would be for it to be no bigger than half the length of that, and that's where we came with it. I mean, it wasn't like we didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And again, that came back from, and we didn't start with this, because you're kind of trying to figure out how can we start from the beginning and work backwards and figure this out. We came with our consultants that said, hey, based on what we've done in lots of other communities, here's the plan. Here's what we took all the feedback. Here's what we took from the renderings. And this is what the community said we want. And this is what we recommend to you. And then we went to work on it with more public engagement and more workshops. And we brought to you what is the recommendation of the staff. Again, as I said, I would rather see the height adjustment be to what it was, because until the fire department feels like that can be done safely and safely mitigated, then it won't get built.
Yeah.
But this process isn't going to come around again for 10 more years.
And so when you were mentioning from the rock shop down the street there, that are we currently considering that one? I mean, in my mind, even though they're all sort of connected, those are all different buildings.
That's exactly what I'm telling you, that our building says they will be exactly like that. There's not going to be any more than a 40-foot business front that's not, it's going to look different through architecture, through facades.
Visually different, but
visually different, but it won't,
Structurally,
just the same as that building is one big building where they're all connected. It's going to be the same
No, there's-
thing, even though
there's gaps.
There's a break
There's
between
gaps and alleys
TI and
there.
the
Yeah.
studio.
I'm sorry. Okay.
But
Visually,
you're
I think
right.
it's
But visually, it looks like one.
yes.
Okay, well, thanks, Jim.
yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just telling you, you could dig into the details on this and it won't get done. I feel like that the default.
Real quick, folks, we're going to go with you guys next. We're almost done with this. We're going to pull you ahead of the other discussion items to make comments.
All right.
So I'm going to call it Jim.
Jim,
Thanks, Jim.
did
I
you,
think we have our.
did you want to
marching order.
finish your sentence?
I was just going to say, I just feel like that there's a point where you get to as close as you can, you pass it, and then if you got to make adjustments to it down the line, you go forward. And if this becomes an issue, you dig into it. A plan comes before, and then you look at it. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
You actually got a whole quarter.
Thank you. John, what else do you need?
Will you please repeat your direction?
Yes, I'm happy to. I just have to find that page again, sorry. So basically, we are asking you to go ahead and create the, I want to say 1A or 2A. Sorry, I don't have the page on me. Just let me get there. We're asking you to we're directing you to present an ordinance establishing the FSOD. And we want to establish a maximum building height of 35 feet for all roof types. It seems like the building length.
I actually don't have, I mean, from what I heard from Chief Schmidtman, yes, there are multiple issues here and multiple concerns, but the biggest concern was the building height.
Yeah.
And so that to me is the biggest thing to change. And I feel like that might be not the happy, but a compromise there where we
Right.
focus on building height and let go of the building length.
The length.
Yeah.
And then what about setback? That's the only thing for sake of
I
access
agree
to the
with-
third floor. What's that?
The
I
third
agree with
floor
that.
Yeah,
setback.
the third floor setback. Are we content with 20, with the reach of the ladder?
I thought we were going to have the town research a
Okay.
few options on
That,
that.
that,
That's what.
that would be great.
Yeah, I would
So-
agree with that.
Is that clear, John?
Sorry. Is there any considerations for the step back in the research that would matter to the board, or just general
Ladder.
principles? Yeah, ladder. Okay. Could we ask Chief Schmidtman if he knows the answer to that question, just so that we save time and you guys
Sure.
have a good answer?
And you can say you don't, if you don't.
So the more the setback is probably the worst.
Yeah.
All right, so we would try to keep it, if you're going with like 35 foot, so I would keep it in that 30, less than 30 feet.
No, you mean
no.
that second floor setting back to the third floor.
Oh, that one. Sorry.
That's the
Oh,
setback.
Sorry, different setback. Okay. I would keep it less than 10 feet.
Thank you. Anything else, John?
Is there any other considerations you would want?
Well, yeah, so like 10 feet works from a fire standpoint, but then like how does that work with the canyon effect? And is there just something there that we have to kind of consider?
Okay.
That's for us to discuss.
I think any setback is going to impact the canyon effect. I mean, I don't think it needs to be very much. If you're on street level and it's set back 3 feet, it's going to look different to your, I don't.
Yeah, it's the view shed.
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
but
I
from
mean,
an
the sun angle, yeah,
architectural,
but I don't think the difference between 6 or 8 or 10.
well, I mean, there is a difference from an architectural standpoint versus if you have it at least 10 feet, you could actually use that space as like a balcony and patio for your apartment up there or something versus if it's 3 feet, it's pretty useless, but certainly that's just something to think about. If that space would be useful or.
John, does that work if you just keep everything, 35 feet height, 200-foot length, and give us like a 6, 8, and 10-foot setback?
Yep.
And then we can talk about it then. I want to move on.
I can do that.
Thank you. I want to we're going to go out of order here. First of all, I think we did that pretty well. Could have been better. was way worse 2 weeks ago. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate your work here tonight. With that, I'd like to call for a public comment on non-agenda items. What coincidence all you people have to be here together again. Three-minute emails only. Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you all. Jess, were you here for that same thing? If you have a public comment on a non-agenda item.
No, just
Good.
listening.
Oh, yeah, with that low green, you gotta hear your echo, your voice echo.
Gosh. So my name is Jessica Fitzer. I am a property owner here in Nederland. My boys go to school here. I'm also a business owner on multiple levels. I'm coming before the board tonight. It's just hilarious. To bring up something that is important to me as a contractor in the town of Nederland limits. Wanted to talk briefly about the current permitting process for subcontractors here in the town of Nederland is quite challenging. Currently, Ned only offers one permitting process for every trade that comes to bring a permit to the town, and that permitting process is it's very off in comparison to other jurisdictions that surround us. We're talking about Boulder County, Gilpin County, Jefferson County. For the same permit for the work that we did electrically, the permit cost us $160 in Jefferson County. The same permit cost us $280 in Gilpin County. The same permit cost us $670 in Boulder County, and the same permit cost us almost $970 in the town of Nederland. You treat your electricians and plumbers and HVAC guys and companies as if they were general contractors. You bill them for things that subcontractors do not have to do. And you drive up the cost that therefore goes to homeowners astronomically. And with doing business in the town of Nederland, we do a lot of service calls for different people. And a lot of what we've been doing lately is fixing unpermitted work because no one wants to pull a building permit to do these things. You have to recognize the situation you're putting your tradespeople in that they are required to pull building permits. But when we come to you and pull building permits, we're asked to pay for, just as an example, we pay the sustainability and permitting fee, which is basically the town now that encourages builders to recycle construction and demolition debris through the recycling deposit program. Electricians, plumbers, and HVACs are not builders. We don't have major materials that we need to recycle. We have everything we bring with us in our van and everything we take back with us, and we go and recycle, and we do all those things anyway. Town of Nederland charges us to do those things, and then we go to the sort yard and we have to pay to actually do that, which is what we do anyway. And then it's just this trickling down of money being spent poorly. And I know that it's been brought up in the past that you are talking about changing up safe build and different things like that. I highly recommend that you start talking to your tradespeople and start asking them how this could be better, because right now it is unsustainable and folks are not wanting to pull building permits. So that's all.
Thanks, Jess.
Random, but yes, thank you.
And thanks for sharing that with us. That's good news, good to know.
And thanks for sticking around for so long.
Yes, thanks, Jess. All right, well, that will come back to our discussion item number 2 on BOT compensation.
Mayor and trustees, I just realized I didn't put a title on this. I apologize, Billy. That was
Thank you, sir.
A miss there. One of the things we're trying to do as staff is really think through our policy question process. And what that means is that we want to bring things for you for discussion that do pop up in the policy realm, because really the role of the Board of Trustees is to set policy and legislative decisions like we just discussed for the town, and the role of staff is to execute that policy. And one of the questions that recently came up is, do we want to look at the compensation structure for the mayor and Board of Trustees? This was last adjusted in 2014. And I think that there is a reasonable question about whether it's aligned with the current compensation. Is it aligned with the responsibilities and time commitment that is associated with your service today? I want to preface before going through this staff report, this only applies to future terms of office. That's per Colorado law. You can't set compensation for yourself while you're seated. You can only do it for future for future terms of the office. So basically, if you did decide to make a change, it would only apply to individuals elected to future terms of office. We are not presenting you with a draft ordinance. As I noted, we're bringing this to you for discussion because we need direction about whether this is something that you guys would like to discuss. In my staff report, I walk through the role of the Board of Trustees, and you see most clearly in section 221 of our code that you are the legislative and corporate authority of the town. You exercise all power conferred or possessed by the town except as provided by statute. Some of those authorities include adopting laws, ordinances, and resolutions, establishing fiscal policy and approving budgets, providing oversight of municipal operations, exercising the corporate authority on behalf of the town, providing oversight of enterprise functions, deliberating confidential matters in executive session, and then serving as our policy-making body. Under section 222, Mayor Billy presides at meetings, represents the town officially, executes contracts, and provides information and recommendations to the board. Those are his different duties. These responsibilities really reflect the council manager form of government, in which you, the elected body, establish policy and provide oversight, and then the town manager administrates operations and executes on those strategies. I just noted here, I think we all know this, but effective governance really requires preparation, deliberation, fiduciary judgment, confidentiality, and sustained engagement. And I think this last year really was something that showed us that pretty strongly for the Board of Trustees. I'm really proud to have been able to work with you all through this process of 2025, because there was a lot of things. There's not just the Eldora acquisition, but there's the Big Springs egress project. There's all the different grant projects we're working on, like TIPS and SMS and our budget, and all the different things that we do. And I know it takes a lot of time, both to sit in these meetings as we get close to 10 o'clock right now, and then over the weekend as you read 18-page staff reports and sometimes longer. And you were appreciated.
That was longer.
Yeah. I wanted to note that because I think that one of the things that's important for me as a manager, and that you guys have really respected for staff, is really thinking through compensation for staff and remembering that people's time has value. And I think that's true for the Board of Trustees too. And I think when you look at compensation across the state, I kind of went through what we do. It's $250 a month for the mayor, $150 a month for trustees. And like I said, those haven't been updated since 2014. You guys have to go to 26 regular meetings. We hold multiple work sessions a year. We hold budget sessions that are separate, which you guys have been great about attending. And I really appreciate it because I know those are not, those are a lot to prepare for. Executive sessions, and then advisory board intergovernmental engagements. You know, you guys go to PSAB and ProSAB, and you go to meetings when I ask you to, and it's appreciated, but it can be a lot. I think it's important to note that today, Nederland isn't the same policy environment as 2014. Land use matters are complicated. Infrastructure planning is complicated. There's different fiscal stewardship requirements. How we think about our intergovernmental relationships is different. And we're soon to have some different enterprise oversight that is going to require sustained preparation and engagement for the Board of Trustees. And so what I've done is bring forward a question about whether this compensation continues to align with the expectation for future terms of office. In my staff report, I detailed several towns. This is based on a recent, I won't call it a salary survey, but CML, which is the Colorado Municipal League, holds a listserv and several meetings for town managers in which work happens to kind of coordinate our efforts across the state. And there was recently thread about what different boards are making. And that's what you see in your staff report. So it details Nederland, Akron, Basalt, Boulder, Breckenridge, Castle Pines, Creed, Fountain, Idaho Springs, Keystone, Lyons, Salida, and Superior. And I think when you look at the compensation, you see that we're pretty close to the lowest tier that there is within that band. I think it's fair to say that when you look at some of these towns, you see that as the complexity of the town goes up, generally the compensation does as well. You could do anything you like. It's just here for discussion. It could happen whenever you want. It could be something that we just pause on for right now. But what I wanted to do is give you some options about what could happen regarding compensation. Option one, you could maintain the current structure we have. If you guys think that what is happening is appropriate in line with current expectations, this is a totally effective strategy. Option two, I tried to adjust for inflation, which has been about 35% over that time period. And so I just increased it by that inflationary method. We could also, if you guys want to change that number, that percentage. That's just a general look at CPI growth. And I said there, I think the reason you might consider this is that, you know, you're still comfortable with the level of compensation, but you recognize that over time, the value of those dollars has decreased. Option 3, just kind of thinking about the time commitment required for this job. I tried to kind of match into like the low mid tier here of where we are, like where compensation is. And that just kind of like reflects the attendance needs and informed participation and just kind of trying to move beyond that lowest band. And then option 5, still not at the top here, or option 4, I'm sorry. Still not at the top, but just a little bit higher, and just thinking about some of our peer municipalities and what they're paying, also thinking through the complexity of government as it is now and what will happen in the future. And just recognizing how important preparation, engagement, and oversight are going to be as we kind of move forward. My 5th option is just puts us in that upper tier. So it's just trying to kind of match into that tier. Fiscal considerations, I think, are really important in this conversation. I do think it's important to recognize that we are in a constrained financial position, as we know. Our mayor and trustees are funded from the general fund, and that's an important thing to be thinking about. We have also not budgeted for an increase this year in 2026. We probably will be doing a supplemental budget in April, so that's something that we could think about. But I haven't done any deep fiscal analysis of this yet because I wanted to bring it to you for discussion first and decide so that you could decide what you want to do or if you want to do nothing. If you do direct, we will return with a report that includes kind of annual costs here that we would expect. If there's other options further down in the staff report we had previously talked during the budget season about whether or not maybe the Board of Trustees was eligible to pay into the town's benefit programs, which I did confirm is possible. But just looking at what costs would be comparison to baseline expenditures and how we might implement timing on this. I also did note that to the extent that board time is attributed to oversight of the mountain recreation enterprise, you may allocate some of those costs into that fund. And that would mean that the work that you do managing the Eldora acquisition and moving forward could come out of that fund, which might be something that provides some fiscal relief as we kind of move forward. If you did want to do that, we would still need to evaluate the percentage allocation scenarios. That's important in government. We need to make sure there's a methodology for how we allocate funds to different, or how we allocate expenditures to different funds. We look at impact to enterprise fund operations and financial metrics, and just make sure that it fit with the sustainability of the enterprise. As I noted, we did previously talk about this last year, and one of the big questions at that time was retirement and medical benefits, and whether or not the board might be able to participate in our medical and retirement plans. I wanted to note that I did find out that this is possible because of the way that you're paid by the town. If you did decide that you wanted to participate in those programs, there's a couple of policy questions, and one is just obviously, should you be allowed to participate? Should that be at your expense, or should there be a town contribution to that? And what would that contribution look like if so? I did note here that if that was part of what we did, we do need to count those benefits into that total compensation package. There might also be other non-cash considerations that we might consider for the board. One thing that's come up frequently with the advisory boards is, could they have rec center access? You know, the community center here is a good community asset that we have, and we always want to make it better too. But maybe the Board of Trustees and advisory boards could have access to this facility. I think it would have a minimal financial impact on the operations here, but there might be other non-cash compensation benefits. We might look at enterprise-related benefits and whether that makes sense. And just kind of like thinking through, like, when we have a board that isn't engaged as the Board of Trustees is in the work that's required, which I know you all know, how can we make sure that we have some stability and we thank people for their time? You know, as the town manager, I said this before, but the work that you've done with staff to support them and to try to raise their salaries, even in a constrained financial situation, has been greatly appreciated. And I think that we need to in turn look at you too, because I think that helps set culture. How we treat our boards and how we treat our staff is related. And I think it's really important for us to think about those metrics and those, just kind of like thinking through what has been required in 2025, which I will say, I think is a busier year than normal. Is it something that from an optics standpoint, does that is that more respectful to the board? Is that something that might encourage more folks to come out and participate in the service that's required for this, and maybe help, as we kind of think through what the overall structure of the town looks like moving forward? Is that something that should be a part of it? It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you do now. It could be something that we put on the parking lot for a future strategic plan. But I thought this was a good time to bring this question forward, just given where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. But that's it. And if you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Clarifying questions for John?
Can we extend the meeting first?
Thank you. Yeah, because I should have switched things, but yeah, we can definitely extend the meeting. I'd like to go ahead and just give us the buffer, just because the second thing is real important for the other meeting for sake of budgeting, but I'd like to extend the meeting at 10:30. Second. Thank you. I don't think we'll need it. But
Better than just multiple extensions.
yeah,
in my
it
opinion.
just wastes another minute.
Trustee Larson,
Yeah.
trustee Maris,
Yes.
trustee Miller,
Yes.
trustee Jocelyn,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Sterling,
Yes.
trustee Corvalon,
Yes.
and Mayor Billy.
Yes, thank you all very much. Go ahead. Clarifying questions for John.
Yes, on this breakdown of other comparisons with other towns, do we have metrics on what their general budgets are or population size? Just not that it greatly impacts our ability to, work within our own budget, but just kind of curious how much other towns of similar sized budgets are paying their elected officials.
I think what you see is there's a mix here. Akron is much smaller than us. Basalt is bigger. Boulder is bigger. Breckenridge is bigger. Castle Pines is bigger. Creed is similar. Fountain
Smaller.
is bigger. Idaho Springs is almost exactly the same. Keystone is bigger. Lyons is a little bit bigger. Salida is much bigger. And Superior is much bigger.
But a caveat to that, so Creed is about 400 people. And their budget it's just coming up through a Google search of 827,000, so a little bit lower in budget. But I think one of the other proxies that you used was we are now acquiring 700 people for town staff.
Yeah, when you look at overall complexity of our town operations, from my perspective, we're likely moving into a band similar to Arvada or Wheat Ridge in terms of employee size. And so complexity of an enterprise community is a little bit different than it is for a typical community. And I think that's really what Mayor Pro Tem Sterling has said is true. The complexity here, while likely not to match the peaks of 2025, is still going to be significantly bigger than it was before.
Yeah, absolutely. When you say in here, that maybe it sounds like some of this money could come from the Mountain Enterprise Fund. Is that what you're saying?
It's a consideration, and that's one of the reasons I brought this to you at this time. As we're kind of working through what that finance package looks like, it's important to make sure that we account for all costs. And so if that's something we're going to do, it's something that I need to be thinking about right now. But I don't know. Again, I'm bringing this to you as discussion. I haven't done work in that space yet.
Right. The obvious non-cash compensation post enterprise fund is, do all town employees get ski area passes?
I don't.
We cannot speak to that at this
Yeah.
time.
Right. But I mean, that's the obvious question of, post acquisition, non-cash benefits.
Non-cash benefits.
That could greatly incentivize certain people to get involved.
I think that those things can be worked through over time. I think this is something that we should bring forward on a regular basis. Some communities have CPI increases built into their process that they're considering that. And I think as we start building good governance structures around what we're becoming, not that we don't have good governance now, but just we build these new systems. One of the things we need to do is make sure that we're bringing these forward on a regular basis and having those conversations.
Yeah, especially over the next few years when we are really adjusting.
Just for clarification, John, you have here as another non-cash consideration is considering rec center access for the board and advisory bodies. Do you mean the gym? I think we already have that.
Only us.
As individuals.
Okay.
Not
But
as a
so for the
family.
board, so for the
Not as a
bot,
family or not SAB or not pro
Family,
SAB.
family
Okay.
would be, family would be awesome.
okay, so I just want to clarify though, that the the trustees already have that.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about planning commission and the advisory board.
Okay, perfect.
I think it's something that's come up for them. One thing that we
Yeah.
need to look at is how that could work in reality. Sometimes benefits are taxable and sometimes they're not.
Right.
We need to do that analysis, but they do a lot of work too. As Jim was saying, they went through a huge process last year, and I think their time probably matches yours in a lot of ways. And so I think being able to encourage people to be on those boards is great too.
No, I totally understand. I just want to clarify here for the public who's reading it, who might not know that we already get it.
And also clarifying, none of the other boards receive compensation.
Of any kind, of any
Of
kind.
any sort, right?
And there's actually a structural reason for that because we're paid as like W-2. And the advisory boards are not. And so, but that also is what gives us access into like the health benefits.
Right. And you may not know this, but are in other communities, are the other, like the planning commission, are people compensated in other communities in that way? I mean, because I'm asking this because
Jennifer.
actually what seems like one of our challenges is staffing the advisory boards. Like that's where we have the biggest challenge. Like we're always at empty seats on BCA or the planning commission or OSAB.
Most boards.
Yeah. Right. And you know, like
I want to keep us moving, so if you could just be quick with your questions, so
well,
others.
just and like one that's come up several times is, you know, like meals, especially on nights when we're going late. Like, does that, if we did meals for BOT meetings or advisory board meetings, does that fall into compensation? Like, how does that work?
I
How
have
does that
a
work?
small budget for that now, and we could be thinking about that in the budget process too.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be necessarily compensate, like, that wouldn't be part of this. Okay.
Thanks, sorry to hurry up, I'm just conscious of time. More clarifying questions at this point.
I had one.
Go ahead, Tanya.
I thought we were gonna have a separate board to deal with Eldora things of people that were more experts in that field versus relying on the BOT to be making decisions that they're not experts on.
Good question.
I think that's, you know, as a board, that's still a decision of when that gets made or when that decision comes to fruition. But, you know, I think part of it is the reality that we're just going to become more complex regardless. Doesn't, 700 new staff employees is just another degree of complexity and things that we have to think through. So we may, just like any of our other advisory boards, get advisement from another board or from consultants, but decisions still rely on us for a lot of these policy decisions.
I think especially around the budget, that's going to be a more complex process moving forward. Not significantly so, but I do think that that's one example.
Gotcha.
More clarifying questions for John? Or Tanya, if you weren't done, keep going.
It's fine.
With that, let's go to public comment. There's no any public comment in the room, Charlie? Folks online, any public comment on this item?